cameras are rolling, I can't just pour a millimeter because it'll look like I'm pouring for someone who doesn't like whiskey. So I got to pour a proper glass.
Like a little happy brown facilitates the conversation every time.
It's gonna wet the lips.
Akatoshin, yeah. I'm gonna wet my liver.
Yeah. All right, well, it's Sunday morning. I can't think of anything better to do than grab our shotguns and scream at some clouds and bemoan and wail about the topic of old man fans, which you and I definitely both qualify as, and obviously there are larger problems to be addressed in the world than the trials and tribulations of fans who are disappointed with the direction of franchises. Like, all right, find a real problem. But as people who love great books and love great movies and TV, video games, etc., and the history of these franchises, I thought it'd be fun just to kind of get warmed up with the role of old man fans. Do they have a leg to stand on? What are the causes for optimism, like the green shoots? What are the things that cause you rage, etc., and so forth? So yeah, I guess first question, at a certain point, should old man fans just kind of let some of these things go? Or is it the time to be like, no, I know a hell of a lot about this shit. Listen to what I have to say.
Like Walt Kelly said in Pogo, we've seen the enemy, and he's us, right?
Yes.
I mean, it's hard to say because we have so much purchasing power, being these old, desiccated white men, these syphilitic, lead-poisoned monsters who just should be sent to the hills. On the other hand, you know, we just don't speak the language that's coming up from the bottom. There's a completely new way of communicating and being a fan, and new properties that people latched onto that are enormous, that we know nothing about. So we're sitting here trying to propagate our version of Star Trek and Star Wars and everything else, and that's great. I mean, we've had that for years and years and years, every single minute of my waking life since I became a conscious entity. You know, on the other hand, we have an outsized effect on how this stuff is regarded and how it is put in everybody's face. We wanted the world at one point to look like Comic-Con 1990. You know, that was a wonderful...
We dreamed about it coming true one day.
Every time I walked into my comic book store and like Peter David was doing a signing of Incredible Hulk issues in '89, I'm like, oh, this is a little island of me culture that wasn't represented anywhere else. And we got noogies in school for liking the Hulk and collecting Transformers and stuff like that.
I remember getting hazed at my boarding school for having posters of like Wolverine slashing Captain America's shield and coming back and it being like, you know, slashed to ribbons or vandalized or whatever. But yeah, you were persona non grata if you liked any of this stuff.
And now, right, to go from that, being 12, 13 years in that world, and to quote the cultural critic James Hancock, who says, I hate the fucking world the way it is now because this shit's ubiquitous.
I always dreamed that comic books would be mainstream because in the 80s, you know, reading Chris Claremont or Walt Simonson or whatever, or John Byrne, any of these great runs, Frank Miller, like, how come the whole world can't see what we can see, that these fictional settings are so dramatically compelling, so exciting, so dynamic? And now that the dream has come true, I guess be careful what you wish for, because I kind of loathe and despise it. Not because I think that in itself is bad, but it's drained all the vitality out of all of the forms of quote-unquote adult entertainment. I remember going to see Spider-Man No Way Home, and a guy with gray hair sitting next to me moaning in sexual ecstasy throughout it every time he saw Daredevil or every time he saw one of the other Spider-Man, and he was having a genuine erotic experience. He was writhing in his seat. And I was disgusted, not because I don't like Spider-Man, but just like, I also want Chinatown. I also want The Godfather. I also want The Deer Hunter. I don't want to live in a world dominated by Spidey, as adorable as Spidey might be. But I guess maybe that's just a sign of, at age 45, finally trying to maybe grow up a little bit. Like maybe it's time to have like a mistress and drink brandy and let him go hunting and that sort of thing, and let all this stuff go and, you know, read Ernest Hemingway novels and that sort of thing.
I've wanted nothing more than to wear a monocle and a silk robe.
Yeah, look like a James Bond villain or an Indiana Jones villain.
Right. Riding pansy when I don't know a horse or something like that. You know, the thing is that we had something of a balanced breakfast when we were kids, because you know what? I did watch, I mean, Christ, we watched Rocky when we were a kid, but I watched Chinatown pretty early. You know, we had junk calories, and we also had a lot of fiber and protein and lean meat and stuff like that in our diet. So we got a chance to, you know, we played Mega Man 2 at the same time as we watched some really cool shit back in the day. You know, it went all over the place, where our parents, not knowing what the hell they were doing, took us to see The Thing and took us to see rated R movies before the age we should have seen.
I used to see double features of The Warriors and The Thing on Laserdisc, and I love it when parents say, look, we're picking what we're watching, and if y'all want to hang out with us, by all means, but if you don't like it, go play with your toys. Whereas now you see like a 5-year-old petulant boy emperor demanding what the entire family watches, and I'm like, no, like, fuck you, you're 5, you don't know anything about movies. Like, I'm going to teach you about movies by exposing you to some cool stuff. Well, what are the causes for optimism? What are the green shoots? What are new franchises, new concepts, new ideas that get you excited, where you feel that jolt of electricity going through your body, where you remember what it's like just to be not a commentator, not a critic, not a filmmaker, but just somebody sitting in the audience just being carried away by a great movie-going experience?
I got my ass kicked when the Harry Potters came out. Didn't read the books. The thing is,
I read the books.
What happened to franchises that were designed for a new audience, and could they be as quote-unquote good as the stuff we enjoyed? And it's like,
Sorcerer's Stone was what, 2002 or 3? When did that thing get up?
I think 01 or 02.
Gotcha.
Yeah, the very first one came out. And that was Chris Columbus did the first two. And my impression was frozen in this idea that Chris Columbus was brought into training wheels this thing into existence. Flash forward 3 or 4 movies ahead, you got Cuarón in there, and Mike Newell. These things slap. They kick ass. They were great. They cast them so correctly. They used the same production team, the same actors. It was the same people making the same movie.
But from movie 5 onward, it's all been the same filmmaker, and each one gets more bland and more. Yeah, I cannot stand his approach to those movies. But Cuarón did the good one.
Cuarón did the good one. Newell did a good one too. Yeah, no, there's some good ones in there. That's the thing. I mean, I take it as a
Azkaban, Prisoner of Azkaban.
It was a Gestalt thing for me. My point was, is I watched something as a hideous old man. Like, there's your gigantic, maximal fiction arc designed for kids today, where kids live. And the best part of it, that was those movies aged with the kids, because Daniel Radcliffe starts off in 2002, and he looks different. They fucking nailed it, man. Every single bit of that. You may not like the filmmaking, but it is a work of art as an arc from the beginning to the end.
Start your countdown to when Warner Brothers says, hey, we're rebooting, we're starting over from the beginning, we're doing all 7 books all over again.
But here's what I want to know from you. The real pertinent question is, like, when did we cross the line? What was the thing? What was the little meat thermometer out of the turkey that said, oh shit, I'm no longer the relevant fan, I'm the old man fan, I'm the problem?
When I started feeling this emotion that I would rather die than see Hollywood ever adapt again any book that I like, any old comic that I like, any video game that I like, just like leave it all alone. Because when we were kids, we had the benefit of a lot of new franchises coming into being, whether it's Predator, RoboCop, but I get sick of seeing things like The Wheel of Time, a fantasy series which I read a lot in high school, then I revisited as the books kept coming out in the early 2000s, and then I revisited again a couple of years ago to finish it. The author died while writing them, but it's like a 14 or 15 book saga. That's one of the great fantasy sagas. And when I saw how Amazon basically just kind of shouted out as an afterthought in this unrecognizable kind of bland garbage, it's like, yeah, please leave everything alone that I like, just because I'd rather just read the books than, I guess it just hurts too deeply when you see something you love get destroyed. And so it's easier just to be hard and evil and to say, leave it all alone, create new stories, stand on the strengths and the merits of your own creation, as opposed to borrowing from the past and basically standing on their shoulders.
Yeah. Star Trek was the one thing that seemed like, it didn't occur to me I was out of step with current tones. It didn't occur to me that Star Trek itself was out of step with current tones. After doing the 3 J.J. Abrams universe sequels with the reboots and all that stuff, it was still in a line where it was dancing between the Harv Bennett movies, the Nicholas Meyer movies, the Gene Roddenberry age, then the TV shows, all those things. Disco comes out, and I start watching it thinking, okay, it's going to be a continuation. We're going to have the tone, the mood, the look, the aesthetic of Next Gen, of Voyager, that sort of thing. And it's a completely dissimilar thing.
Although they take every chance they get to reference tribbles or little...
Yeah.
We'll get to it later, but Easter eggs, they love the stupid Easter eggs that they kind of sprinkle throughout. See, it's still Star Trek. It's like, no, it isn't.
Well, I mean, it is. At the same time, it's not.
They call it Star Trek.
It's not for me. But the thing is, the separation, or I don't know, it's not a divorce, it's just sort of this amicable separation between me and Star Trek, or this version of Star Trek, is perfectly fine now, because I realize I'm in touch with the voice of the fans who've really gravitated to it, and I can see, wow, they have a completely separate set of needs when it comes to Star Trek than I do. And Discovery, I mean, if anyone doesn't follow along at home, it fulfills those needs in a way that I look at it and it makes no sense. Not that it doesn't make any sense, it's just utterly unimportant to me. But people see so much of themselves in it in a way the other Star Treks weren't fulfilling.
Yeah, there are a lot of people who've never watched any Star Trek who are watching it now. But there are people who are older who are, like, one of my favorite channels, this called the Burnett Work. He's in his late 50s, early 60s. He hate watches every single episode, but he still watches every single episode just so he can criticize it more accurately. It's easier for me to give my emotion to something that's incredible, like Elden Ring. Like one of the greatest video games ever in the history of mankind just came out like a month or so ago, and it's so pure in its intentions and what it goes for and what it accomplishes, and it comes at the long end of like a run of like extraordinary Japanese video games like Dark Souls 1, 2, and 3, and Bloodborne, and Sekiro Shadows Die Twice. Like, yes, this is, it's not trying to borrow from the past, it's not trying to use that as a crutch, it's something completely brand spanking new, completely immersive.
We are aware of video games taking over a lot of the onus of storytelling, long-form storytelling. But we don't give it the credit it deserves. You know,
I do.
Yeah. Oh, you do, right. Yeah. But it's like entities that observe culture put video games into a different silo.
It's a common complaint in movie reviews. They say, oh, the special effects made it look and feel like a video game. Like, you don't realize that's actually a compliment, because a lot of video games are 1,000 times cooler than these stupid fucking movies.
People don't I mean, maybe it occurred to me 7 or 8 years ago where it's like, okay, not only is there a superlative, and as much as a Pixar movie amount of work goes into a video game, but you know, you're talking about 60 hours of story sometimes, 70 hours of story.
Yeah, Elden Ring about 200, yeah.
200 hours of story, right? It's like, imagine the R&D that goes into that, the man hours going into programming that. You get a guy like George R.R. Martin wrote the Bible on it, right? Yeah. He's the guy that comes in.
He collaborated with Miyazaki to create the world.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so, you know, you don't realize that you're reading a book series when you play that game. You don't realize that you're watching 7 movies when you play that game. And people happily signed up and they paid, well, $75 to buy the game.
And you get your money's worth in a day.
And you have DLC, there's all this extra content, there's all this other thing. So it's like, it picks up the heavy lifting in a way that, imagine, in addition to Wrath of Khan, in addition to Predator back in 87, 82, 79, imagine if you had a video game experience running on a parallel track where you got to live inside of a storytelling effort, and it's not just the passive experience. That's the idea. You're holding the control in your hand.
Absolutely.
You're playing the story while also watching the story. It flows over you.
That was the role of tabletop RPGs in the 80s for me.
Yeah.
As much as I loved watching movies and shows, I was also a giant D&D freak. And you're basically taking text and a rule system, but you're creating your narratives, and people are creating their own characters. And it's no, you know, coincidence that a lot of people who loved D&D in the 80s and 90s now write shows, write movies.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the creators of the show Game of Thrones nerded out on D&D when they were kids together, and then they discovered the George R.R. Martin books, and they made the pitch, et cetera, and so forth, and the rest is history.
Speaking of your freaking old man fans, the D&D people have subtly done the same thing. They've infiltrated like the comic book nerds. You know, if you got Joe Manganiello running that D&D game with an A-list room in a basement somewhere, well, that's fucking awesome. That's crazy. So those guys did the same thing the comic book people do, but Manganiello looks so much cooler doing it. Yeah. Right? For some reason, D&D, which was even worse than comic books when we were, you talk about the noogies you'd get noogies times 2.
Oh, yeah.
If you played D&D, but now it's like, now this rock star.
Wedgies to the point where your whitey-tighties would get torn. Yeah, it was not the way to meet the ladies in the 80s, but I embraced it all the way. I mean, I lived in that world my entire childhood, up through I almost got thrown out of my fraternity because I converted a large chunk of it into being a D&D crew, and I had a secret meeting behind my back where they almost 9/10th'd me out of you have to have 9/10ths of the house vote against you to throw you out. But I get excited about things like A24 now having movies in the multiplex. Wow, like they used to be art house, but now they've got a movie like Midsommar, a couple of years ago, which can play to big box office. That's a cause for optimism. Or when I see the Criterion Collection having such a almost cult-like presence online, with so many young film fans falling in love with movies just through their taste and selection, that's a cause for optimism. And when it comes to blockbuster filmmaking, not all is lost. Like recently The Batman came out, and while it was not for me on the level of something like The Dark Knight, but my dad saw it on his own, I saw it on my own, and my teenage siblings saw it on their own. It's 3 different generations that are all enjoying it, having fun with it. I don't have a heart of stone. I'm more than capable of getting on board stuff when it's really cool, but I guess when you're older, you just get cynical. Like, been there, done that, bought the t-shirt, I've seen everything. What can you show me that's new? Whereas someone who's 15 might just be easier to please. Like, well, I've never seen this done this way before, so it's new to me.
Yeah, to tangent off that green shoot, I'll use the archetype of Gunn coming out of the Lloyd Kaufman trauma machine, somehow smuggling his way over to Kevin Feige's shop, taking this title that was, granted, Guardians of the Galaxy was a fairly popular title, but it was fairly obscure. It had its own little corner.
Early 90s was a hit comic.
Yeah, and that version that Abnett Lanning
Which
made.
is a deep tease for our image conversation later on, because one of the artists on that made the switch.
Yeah. Yes. But I mean, the idea, they took the Abnett Lanning version and adapted it, but it was more about James Gunn in particular, I'm going to use him as a stand-in. Now, Gunn, I think, is as old as we are, if not older. So he's not.
He's
not a young creator. But the phenomenon of a guy like Gunn coming out of Lloyd Kaufman's, trauma madness, I think that's exactly what we need more of. It's like, I think you're going to find more infiltrators as we go along with these like lunatics and crackpots.
I mean, he was doing, not that long before Guardians of the Galaxy, his PG porn series, which is everything you love about porn, but without the sex. And it was big name actors like Nathan Fillion and people like that popping in, and legit porn stars like friggin' Sasha Grey, but they were doing porn shoots, but they would never actually do anything, and it was just absolutely hilarious. But the fact that he got tapped to make Marvel, just shows Marvel's in a different place at that time.
Himself in. And this is my prediction is that tomorrow's Frank Henenlotter is going to come out of that grimy downtown street trash thing, and then he too is going to make a shot at something weird for A24. That it's not him in particular. I wish it was him, but it's going to happen. And again, there's so much room now. People are buying so much strange shit to fill up the fucking fire hose of content. All those little moving boxes on Amazon and Netflix that autoplay, and it's like, what is all this shit? Well, the thing is, at some point, one of those little boxes is going to be a good thing that like the next pervert creep ass Henenlotter comes up with.
It'll be the next Barry Lyndon.
Yeah, or it's going to be the next. What was the Hammer Super? The one with Rainn Wilson.
I love Super. Yeah, that was James Gunn's flop right before Guardians of the Galaxy.
People are
I love Super. That's a genuinely subversive superhero flick done down and dirty indie style, and it's 1,000 times cooler than most of kind of the mainstream superhero movies that get made today. If you're running a studio, and at a time where DVD sales are disintegrating, Blu-ray sales are disintegrating, TV is changing like sand beneath your feet, and you don't know which way the wind's blowing, one of the easiest, safest things to do, like, all right, we're going to do live action remakes of Disney princess cartoons. We're going to do nothing but Marvel, DC, and Star Wars. We're going to do the big brands and nothing else because it's just too scary and too dangerous to take a risk. But there are exceptions. I mean, earlier I said, I don't want to see anybody ever adapt anything that I love ever again, but I'll contradict myself because I feel like Denis Villeneuve, in good faith, is at least trying to do the best that he can with Dune, with the 2 movies that he's making out of that first book. So all is not lost. It's just easy to get disappointed and frustrated when you see that all the air in the room is going toward something like Ready Player One, a Steven Spielberg movie that's just dining out on nothing but nostalgia and Easter eggs and trivia, but it doesn't have a pulse, it doesn't have well-written lines, it doesn't have emotion, it doesn't have style. It's just a bunch of stuff that you recognize. Here's a bunch of stuff you recognize. Buy a ticket. Don't ask questions, just consume.
Fuck Ernie Klein, that's the first thing, right? It's like, that's the problem, is when a guy like that cynically makes a book. And I'll be honest, I have a lot of really smart friends who were fans of that book and, took it. They were very happy to have this product that was filled with all this stuff, all these ciphers, every single character. And then they liked the movie too. And I neither read the book nor saw the movie because I can't do that. It's like battery acid in my ear. it's not for me. But it seemed like the most cynical thing imaginable. Like Klein just decided, I know what to do.
Weaponized nostalgia.
Weaponized nostalgia. I'm going to use this as a fucking cudgel. Villeneuve, if only there were more of him. I mean, maybe there are. But to be honest, he's the only one in a character class. He's sort of the only sort of big boy series director who's mucking around a genre right now. Even if I love Dune, everyone knows I'm the Dune guy, and I love the first movie. And when the second one comes out, I'm going to give them both. That's a complete deal. I'll give them both a 5-star review, and we're going to be able to eat out on that forever. I'm going to be so happy to have that. And so I'll have Dune from '84. I'll have 2 Villeneuve Dunes. They'll be great. We have all the books.
Not reading Jodorowsky doc.
Yeah, not reading them Brian Herbert and Kevin Anderson books. Those don't count.
I've read the first 4.
Yeah, I didn't. I didn't stick my toe. But it's like Villeneuve is exactly the guy you want playing around in. If they're going to give IP to somebody, you're going to give adaptations to somebody. He's this like the real deal filmmaker you want doing that. Look, I would have been happier if he made another thing like Sicario. If he did his own particularly weird.
Yeah, I love Sicario.
The Sicario is great. I mean, Arrival was great. I'm just saying, it's like when he does his own thing, he's got the juice. And when he adapts this thing, he's got some juice in there too. That's what's amazing.
I'll never forget his line at Comic-Con. I was in Hall H, and somebody asked him why would he make a movie or sequel to Blade Runner, a beloved, acknowledged classic. Like, why can't you just leave well enough alone? He said, well, I didn't want somebody else to fuck it up. Mm-hmm. and the movie underperformed. But I feel like, once again, you can tell with the best intentions in the world, he gave us the best Blade Runner that he could deliver as a filmmaker. I haven't revisited it once since I saw it in the theater, so perhaps it wasn't as successful as he would have liked or as I would have liked. But once again, he was the guy at that time to at least have the best shot at giving us a possible Blade Runner.
Yeah, I mean, you could say that the sin of that movie, one of the sins, is stuck in the Jared Letoization of film, where all of a sudden that's what's going to make a serious movie, is the studio foisting this A-lister, Oscar-winning actor on a guy like that. He's got to find a way to build a movie around him, and clearly he's not ready for the job.
I've got a big topic I want to get to about one of the main drivers of bland global escapism, but for you, is there anything else that I'm overlooking at what's brought us to this moment, or is it just one of the situations where, like a studio like Disney, which used to make lots of mid-range movies, suddenly they said, we're not going to make any mid-range movies anymore. We're only going to do tentpole movies, and we're going to, instead of doing maybe 20 movies a year, we're going to do maybe 8 or 9, and every single one of them is going to feel like a massive event. Like, is this the culture? Is just a natural byproduct of that switch, or that the new emphasis on a new kind of filmmaking, just blockbusters at the expense of everything else?
Yeah, the myth of perpetual, what is it? You call it the myth of perpetual gain?
Well, all your shareholders like to believe in the myth of perpetual growth, but it's not possible. No company gets bigger forever.
And even look, Disney at one point, they had Touchstone, which was their kind
I used to be a shareholder, but I'm no longer. All my Marvel shares got converted to Disney when Disney bought Marvel.
Yeah. I mean, at one point, like Touchstone, Disney did make movies for grown-ups. They even put rated R. They even put rated R movies out at a certain time.
They had brands within brands, so it wouldn't put a dent in the reputation of Mickey Mouse.
And every time I hear something, preposterous, like how much money Fatal Attraction made on a budget where it was like $15 million prorated $87, and it made something like 150 or something.
No, it made almost 400.
Almost 400 million. That's the thing. So you say that now, it's like, well, that's Mirabile Dictu. Look at the freaking yield on that. That's crazy. It's crazy that
that's real money.
It's real money.
Yeah,
and it's like, well, anybody in any time frame should look at that kind of growth and say that's. And you make a movie like Fatal Attraction, that's what does it, right? Like, you get to move the needle, cast these actors in that moment, make a movie like that, and you
It's a movie for adults that kids want to sneak into. So once again, 4 quadrant, everybody's going. Just you have to frown upon the kids like myself who had to sneak into the theater.
And the entire gross of that movie is that's the production budget of something that comes out of Mulan right now.
And when it comes to profitability, that's what gets lost in this conversation. Joker cost $50 million to make and it grossed over $1 billion. It was the most profitable superhero movie ever made. Forget Endgame, because they spent a lot on it and they spent a lot marketing it. I feel like that's the real blockbuster. When you make a movie like Deadpool for 50 or 60 million and it grosses a couple hundred million. I wish Hollywood would chase those, because you can take a risk with an R-rated piece of genre entertainment, because you're only spending 50 or 60 million. If you lose everything, you're not going to have to close your door. So
at the same time, look, Joker I didn't care for. I don't think Todd Phillips is like the big time director. Deadpool I liked well enough, but one thing both of those movies had in common for me is that for all the things you just say, I thought they were really predictable what was going on in both of those films, where they were built to be the one movie that was that 50 million stretch drive to the end, and they had all the pieces, a very calculated, cynical, flowchart designed by people in Burbank to say, how can we make a movie that looks like it's got the rated R thing on it. It's got Ryan Reynolds, it's got pegging in the one scene in Deadpool. You get some risque things, some nudity, a lot of violence, but it's still perfectly CGI filled, looked like a superhero movie. It was still 4 quadrant. It's just that they decided we can take a risk a little bit. That was Fox obviously made this decision, not Disney.
Another trend that I loathe is when people say, well, we're going to make this movie PG-13, but we're going to take it all the way to the edge. It's going to be the most hardcore PG-13 you've ever seen, like with Venom. That was the debate for years. Well, we might make it R, but we might make it a really hardcore PG-13. I'm sorry. A hardcore PG-13 is like saying, this is the most hardcore brand of O'Doul's we've ever served. It's non-alcoholic beer, but it's non-alcoholic beer for like people who like to party. It's like, well, then it's not beer. I'm sorry. It's what the hell are we talking about? I hate
grape
that
juice
trend.
and wine, you idiot.
Yeah, but now people are talking about that with Deadpool. Oh, Disney's going to make a hardcore PG-13 Deadpool. I'm like, please die. I have no interest in a PG-13 Deadpool.
No, I think that I felt cynical about those 2 movies. I think they were cynical about making them. And I could say the thing about Joker, which was a real lob shot, was that they built half a movie around Joaquin Phoenix. Joaquin Phoenix was the guy who essentially furnished an arc, furnished cinematography, furnished filmmaking.
Oh, without him, there's nothing there. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, I mean, I think that Hollywood's doing a good enough job of driving its own frozen pizza. You know, they're taking the wrong lessons from these things. They're chasing perpetual growth, which is a myth. I've said this before. Disney's treating movies like apps. They're treating movies like iPhones. It's like Disney needs to make tech company money. Movies don't behave the same way video games and iPhones do. They just don't. And so Disney's kind of like perverting the filmed art form to get to the same place that a thing like Google is at. And it's like Disney and Google should never be competing in the same space, and yet there they are.
But maybe it would be helpful if we even define what we mean when we criticize a movie as tasting like frozen pizza, because I've eaten Tombstone pizza, it's fucking delicious. But it's not as good as Arturo's, like, you know, at Houston and Thompson and that sort of thing. But maybe you and I should both come up with some examples of what we mean by frozen pizza. And for me, frozen pizza is when you take something like RoboCop from the 80s and then you do a PG-13 remake. Or you take Total Recall from 1990 and you do a PG-13 remake where the sex is gone, where the hardcore violence is gone, any sort of provocative language is gone, and suddenly what you're left with is something fun for the whole family. But like I said, let the adults pick the movie and let the kids go along for the ride if they're cool. Like I saw Conan the Barbarian when I was 5. Conan the Barbarian is not frozen pizza. But can you think of an example in the last 5, 6, 7 years where like, oh, like that movie had all the potential in the world, but what we're left with is a movie without any rough edges, without anything that'll offend anybody, without anything that'll excite anybody. What are like the main, I guess who are the guilty parties when it comes to frozen pizza?
How about this? I think it's more important to, you talk about defining frozen pizza. It's as much the culprits as it is the environment that's going to go into doing it. Because, again, we've said this, when you make a movie for everybody, you're essentially making a movie for nobody. That person doesn't exist. It's a blob, it's a shmoo, the shape that just takes whatever form you want to. Mr. Potato Head with the holes, none of the things put into it, right? That kind of thing. That's what's ridiculous about it. But it's like, the biggest offense to me in all of this is thinking about you have to flatten every feature of the art to do this. So it's not just making toothless decisions, because look, I've watched real mild movies that still have something interesting about them. And I think what's horrifying is it's not just the decisions to make a weak movie that has some feature that's interesting. It's almost like by design, you're de-interesting-ing everything in a movie, right?
I like that, de-interesting-ing.
Yeah, and here, you think of all the things we just take for granted when you watch a great movie. You are flattening every feature of film. You're flattening the writing. You're flattening the direction. You're flattening the camera movements. You're flattening the color space, the cinematography, the way the lens moves. You're flattening everything, location shots. I mean, it's like just fucking hammer it as flat as shit. And that's what you need to do. Get rid of any protrusions or protuberances or projections and make something absolutely level.
And we're complicit because there are audience members who want that experience. Oh. They want to be able to put on Disney Plus for their kids and walk out of the room knowing nothing that they see at any point will upset them, excite them, stimulate them, get them going. They want to walk in like they are good to go for 9 hours watching something that's dripping with nostalgia or capitalizing on the past, but nothing is. They're not going to hear Zendaya and Euphoria talking about how fentanyl is the best drug ever. It's like, wow, how did Warner Brothers let that get into the show? But she has like a lengthy spiel about how fentanyl is awesome.
2 examples I thought of really quickly in terms of something that worked in the same space, in the comedy space. Now, I'm not saying these are the greatest movies, I'm not saying these are the worst movies. However, look at the stylistic differences. In a movie like Swingers, I don't know how people feel about it, but the thing is, Swingers was made by a real director, Doug Liman. It was real cinema. It actually moved, it behaved as a film.
Yes, the tail end of the 90s indie craze.
Yeah, but the thing is, it was written by a guy, that was like his first film, Favreau's first script, and Lyman was a great director, and that was like, I think, one of Lyman's first movies, if not his actual first movie. But Swingers behaves as a film. It's got jagged edges, it's got protuberances, it sounds interesting, it looks interesting, it behaves interesting, it moves, there's something to watch. And I love this movie, but look at 40-Year-Old Virgin. 40-Year-Old Virgin barely behaves as a film. It's a script. It's linorama, right? Judd Apatow is not a film director. Judd Apatow was
especially today.
Especially today.
But he was funny as hell back in the day.
And I loved it. Look, 40-Year-Old Virgin's a great, funny. I saw it I've seen 100 times. The thing is, as a film, It's not a film. There's no cinematography. It's no writing. It's just lines. It's an if you want that, go to ASCAD at UCB. And I have. I like that. I enjoy people running out in the middle of Anchorman and saying, what does Sex Panther smell like? It smells like the prosthetic leg filled with Indian food, right? Those are great hits. And it's like, that's not a movie. That is just lying around. But that's watching a sitcom. That's watching somebody just riff at a bar and just try to cut their friends up. And it's like what a comedy sounds like today in terms of what the audience expects it to be is a 3-hour-long Adam Sandler sad fest that Judd Apatow directs.
You get Dave Bautista, pair him with a kid, and it's a very innocent, heartwarming fable. But it's like, no, that's not a comedy. A comedy is Jackass Forever, where you laugh so hard you will take a dump in your pants and fall out of your chair. That is a comedy. And yeah, but when it comes to comedy, no genre has started to taste more like frozen pizza in the last 10 years than the comedy genre. Big budget comedies do not exist
Comedies
anymore.
aren't comedy. They're action films with punched-in jokes.
I read this fascinating book earlier this year that's like one half business school case study and one half film history. But Eric Schwartzel, who writes for the Wall Street Journal, wrote this book, Red Carpet. And it was as riveting and intoxicating and depressing as any movie that I've ever seen. And I guess the whole China story got on my radar over the last couple of years when I started seeing articles in Variety and Hollywood Reporter and like the Deadline, all the trades about the souring of the relationship. Because in an ideal world, once upon a time, it was a relationship of mutual exploitation. Hollywood wanted this rapidly growing audience, and it's now officially the largest audience in the world for watching movies. And China wanted to learn a little bit about Hollywood filmmaking for their own homegrown film industry. So marriage made in heaven or hell, depending upon your point of view. But this story really goes back to 1994 when China first opened their doors to Hollywood and said, all right, 10 movies a year, you only get a piece of the box office, but let's do some business. So opened with The Fugitive, made a few million. It was always a market that was regarded as having a lot of growth, a lot of potential. But it didn't really crystallize until Avatar, when new 3D theaters started being constructed all over the country. And by 2011, it's really in full swing where Transformers movies are grossing more in China than they are in America. They're even doing Chinese product placement, Chinese actors, Chinese locations, even working with the Chinese government for like script approval and or modifications. And now suddenly there appears to be a divorce that's happening where the 10 movies that are supposed to come out every year, maybe it's only 3 or 4, and Hollywood's like, oh shit, like what the fuck's going on? Like, we've been green-lighting movies recently on the assumption that we're gonna possibly gross a couple $100 million. Like, you don't get to green-light a movie like, take your pick, some giant monstrosity. Say West Side Story, which lost a ton of money, unless there's the hope that you might be able to recoup a lot of that over in China. And what I found most fascinating about this book, it's a giant topic and it's so multifaceted, but each chapter he'd focus on one filmmaker or one production and show kind of the ups and downs, the trials and tribulations along the way to kind of help you have a window into this ever-evolving story. And I just want to I want to invite people into the subject by just calling attention to a few of those stories just so people have an idea of what the hell is going on, because the first worrying signs that
a lot of people don't know. This is going to be news to a lot of people where it's background chatter.
News to me.
We have to explicate this stuff in particular so that people understand this is a foreground thing happening.
For me, it was background noise for the last couple of years, but the late 90s when we see our first signs that Hollywood and China are a strange kind of, couple, because you have Kundun, you have 7 Years in Tibet, and you have Red Corner, all of which send shockwaves throughout Hollywood, because in China, they have this concept, or it's from an idiom from an old fairy tale: kill the chicken to scare the monkey, because this guy with a performing monkey, the monkey won't perform, so he kills the chicken in front of the monkey starts dancing again. And these 3 movies, you have the first examples of kill the chicken to scare the monkey, because Kundun's made by Disney, very pro Dalai Lama, late 90s, Dalai Lama is very big in Hollywood, people love the Dalai Lama. Richard Gere, 1993, makes a speech at the Oscars about Tibet and China, everybody stands up, thunderous ovation, everybody's on board. So a lot of these movies started getting made. But Disney wanted to make theme parks, and they wanted to create cable channels. They wanted to sell toys in China. China did not like Kundun, and this is still when the market's very small. And Michael Eisner has to fly to China and essentially grovel.
Kowtow and grovel,
Yeah.
beg and scrape, bow and scrapers.
It says, we did not mean to offend our friends. Disney is a silly company. We make silly entertainment, family friendly, etc. This will never happen again, and we're going to basically bury the movie. It'll never get
It's
seen.
an apology for the ancients. Right
7
there.
Years in Tibet, made by Sony. Well, Sony doesn't just make movies. They also sell electronics. China made it abundantly clear.
Sony's a Japanese company,
Yeah,
too.
and they're Japanese. China made it abundantly clear, hey, you know all those like Walkmans and like DVD players and TVs that you sell in China? We might just close our doors to you for a year because we do not like 7 Years in Tibet. And then Red Corner with Richard Gere, which he's very proud of, he is no longer able to be cast in any movie that is hoping to open in China because they do not like Red Corner, they do not like him. So if you're making Ant-Man and you're casting Henry Pym, maybe you might consider Richard Gere. He's the perfect age. But let's go with Michael Douglas because
I didn't think about
that's
that.
the easier path. That's the path of least resistance. And the story, and once again, this is late 90s when the box office is nothing. Flash forward now to early teens in the 21st century, and you have Transformers: Age of Extinction making hundreds of millions over there. China's able to thump their chest and kind of flex their muscles. Like Dark Knight in 2008, China asked for changes with the Chinese gangster from Hong Kong. Yeah. Warner Brothers refused. No Chinese release. But once again, the market wasn't there yet. This is pre-Avatar. A few years later, it might have been a very different conversation that they had with Christopher Nolan. And I think the most chilling story out of all of this happened recently with Chloe Zhao. And between The Rider and Nomadland, she was on the ascent, kicking butt. She was born in Beijing. Chinese officials love the fact that she's about to win an Oscar for Best Director. Like the stars were in total alignment. Disney taps her to make Eternals, giant Marvel movie. It looks like this is going to be a win-win, home run. Everybody's going to be happy. But then a little-known interview with a Filmmaker magazine from 2013 surfaces where Chloe had the audacity to describe China as a country of lies. Not only does Eternals not get a release in China, but they scrub her from the internet. You cannot find a mention of Nomadland or The Rider anywhere on the Chinese internet. And so these are decisions now that are driving what gets made, how they get made, and by whom. And if you're feeling a slight chill running through you, I'm feeling it as well because it's a very ominous situation where another country's values, another country's censorship, another country's bureaucracy is dictating anticipatory censorship on the part of filmmakers and writers in Hollywood. Like, well, I'm writing this giant movie, this huge sci-fi superhero extravaganza, but I can't include explicit sex because they don't like that in China. I can't include themes of an outsider prevailing because they don't like that in China. I can't include homosexuality, like
sorry, Freddie Mercury, not happening.
Bohemian Rhapsody, yeah. Wildly recut for the Chinese market. And I can't even include themes of dissent because once again, they might not like that in China. And the rules are always shifting. It's not like they have an official rating system and a list of rules. Abide by these rules, you get your release, we're good to go. It's a black box. It's diplomacy. It's mysterious. It's confusing. And the rules that apply to Hollywood movies don't necessarily apply to the Chinese movies. Wolf Warrior 2. But what do you think of this situation so far?
2 words: soft power. Those are the words that Schwartzel used in the book. I mean, that's an ancient term that goes back to diplomacy, in the old days. But like the Chinese are able to wield a type of cudgel. I keep using this term. Outside their own borders, and they know exactly what they have going for them. I think people's eyes tend to roll in the back of their heads and they glaze over and they just tune out when they hear about international diplomacy. People don't really pay attention to what happens in foreign governments anymore. They're aware of the Communist Party running China. They're generally aware maybe of the Three Gorges Dam project. Maybe they're aware of the huge modernization where all the villages were emptied out and put into these prefab cities over the course of 15 years. Really shoddy construction. The fact that they established Hong Kong again. When it was handed back in 1999, the culture in Hong Kong changed drastically. China is not a monolith. I mean, the government is. That's the thing about the Chinese Communist Party out of Beijing. It runs as a monolith, but the country is a fascinating place. It is 15 countries in one. It's a confederation.
1.3 billion people.
1.3 billion people, yeah. But all the different regional variations from the south to the west to the north. I mean, it encompasses every single topography you can imagine. And the people are extremely different. And, there has been no, mass project on Earth, the size of which the Belt and Road Initiative that they're doing, also the fact that they prefab these cities out of thin air. It's all amazing. So they've created...
And filled with multiplexes. Like I said, more screens than anywhere else in the world.
Well, they invented a middle class, albeit a very unusual looking middle class to us. But the other thing that they've done is they've ran through levels of cultural literacy very fast, because I think up until recently, the market they were playing in China was probably equivalent to like 1940s, 1950s American suburban market. That was the idea of decoding messages.
Hollywood also had the complacency of assuming we will always be able to make blockbuster entertainment better than they can.
Yeah.
Hollywood has been so dominant for so long, they were operating under the assumption that they could always create a form of blockbuster entertainment that would be the best in the world. But what was happening all this time was that people like Rennie Harlin, who were unhireable in America, were getting gigs over in China. And not only were they getting gigs over there making these giant blockbusters, but suddenly Rennie Harlin's back on top. Cutthroat Island never happened. He had a largely Chinese crew, and they are studying what he's doing, because at the time there was a period where a lot of Chinese audiences members thought that their official state propaganda tasted a little bit like medicine. But what they really wanted was to make a movie like The Patriot. Because The Patriot, while I might think it's a ridiculous movie, it was wildly popular and has a certain kind of ultra-nationalistic flavor that China wanted to create. And now, all of a sudden, in like 2017, it becomes abundantly clear that while Hollywood thought they were the exploiter, they were the ones being exploited when a movie like Wolf Warrior 2 emerges that is insanely popular. I've watched it. It's a ton of fun. It's ultra violent. It's totally insane, but it's as jingoistic and nationalistic as something like First Blood 2, Rambo. And I imagine being a teenager in China now, you probably feel something very similar watching Wolf Warrior 2 to how I felt watching First Blood 2 back in the mid-'80s. And when those movies are outperforming Marvel movies, or Marvel movies aren't even getting released at all, well, now the tables have turned, because Hollywood still desperately needs China. They need that box office. They greenlit these movies like Black Widow and Shang-Chi and Eternals, operating under the assumption that China will always say yes. Now they're saying no. These movies are making it more difficult to be profitable, and China's film industry is thriving. It's fully operational. They are cranking them out. Are they exporting them to the degree that they would like? No, but they are. It wouldn't surprise me at all if in 20 years, instead of Hollywood consultants like Rennie Harlin going to China, you see the reverse, where Hollywood's like, we kind of don't know what we're doing anymore. Can y'all come over here and tell us how to run our business for us, please?
Yeah, well, again, the soft power comes because Wolf Warrior was as much made for its African constituents as it was to play inside China. Which is, it spins your head to realize that, the Chinese have been investing so much money in Africa to essentially pull out rare earth metals and various resources. And, they've been doing all sorts of things, building bridges, building roads, schools, hydration, water plants, sewage treatment. The idea has been to exploit the continent of Africa. One of the psyops thing that they do, and China made this jingoistic movie that really is about the Chinese guy saves the Africans from the white
from the Americans.
From the Americans.
Yeah, I mean, you've got a Marvel star in the form of, remind me of his name?
Grillo.
Frank Grillo.
A man whose name you cannot remember.
I'll never remember.
Under pain of death.
Crossbones from Civil War. But he's playing the villain, and to be fair, you can tell he's having a blast because kick-ass martial arts sequences.
Paid millions of dollars.
And it's R-rated, hardcore graphic violence in an action movie that we used to see on the regular in America. But now we make these, once again, we make PG-13 frozen pizza. You won't see a blockbuster with like squibs exploding as people are just getting laid low. And so, like I said, I didn't necessarily buy into the propaganda of the film, but as an action lover, I sat back and I was like, I have to give credit where credit is due. Wolf Warrior 2 is beating Hollywood at its own game because they don't even make these kinds of movies anymore.
Yeah, but it's so strange to think that the state, the Chinese state out of Beijing is such a prudish, moral, nanny state, a paternal place.
Yeah, no horror movies, no ghosts, no sex.
Yeah, no ghosts.
It's a very paternalistic attitude toward their own population in a lot of ways.
In all the Disneys in China, there's no haunted mansions because you cannot do ghosts.
That's why Ghostbusters didn't get a release there.
Yeah, it's crazy.
All the recent reboots.
Yeah, it's wild. Anyway, but the thing is, it's like, blood is no problem. Disappearing people on the street, no problem. The Uyghur camps in Western China, no problem. The demeaning of the human body, no problem. I mean, this is a separate side issue, but there's this idea, I've read this about this, they said apparently one of the hoary things that's been left over in China for thousands of years is that a body belongs to the state. we think of ourselves.
As does the film industry. It's an arm of the state.
Yeah, right. And it's like, but we have this, Western myth about, we're each men standing in a cornfield, hoeing the land, building our own ship, going to vistas and doing our own thing. Every man is, it's manifest destiny. You have what you want. Your liberty is your own thing. And in China, it's like, no, you belong to the state. You're part of a body. And so whatever the state wants with your body, that's what allows them to move millions of people from villages, flatten the villages, flood them with water to build a dam, move them to cities. And people complain, but it doesn't get them anywhere because you have a central state. And here's the bigger problem with all this is that China is an autocracy. People may know what that word means, but look at Beijing. What's coming out of the Politburo, the parliament, whatever it is in Beijing. That's an autocracy. That's a top-down paternal view. You have all the princelings, all these the descendants of Mao who are still running the Communist Party, especially after all these purges, these anti-corruption purges, where they were actually executing people for taking bribes over the last 5 years, cleaning house, and that was Xi Jinping consolidating power. You can't fight an autocracy. An autocracy always wins. We are too fractious. I mean, if you want to talk about Hollywood...
What you're reminding me of is one of the funniest stories of when they were trying to do a Chinese remake of Serpico. People don't know Serpico is about Al Pacino in the 70s fighting police corruption in New York. But it's hard to do a movie about police corruption in China without acknowledging that police corruption exists. And of course there's no police corruption in China. So the movie didn't get made. Does the American movie exist if you're acquiescing more often than not? Because once again, going back to Marvel, Doctor Strange, the first one, the character of the Ancient One, which in the comics, which is a Tibetan wizard. Well, Tibet, that's a touchy subject. But if you change his race and you change his gender, some people might say that, you're whitewashing him. But Hollywood had to basically do the calculation. Do we offend Americans by whitewashing an Asian character, or do we offend the Chinese by having a Tibetan character? And they decided it's easier and better to offend the Americans by whitewashing with a Celtic warrior played by Tilda Swinton, as opposed to doing a Tibetan monk, which would offend China. As part of media literacy, it's important to know how your media gets made, by whom, and what's driving their decisions. And like I said, when it comes to film history, or if you just like the film business, Red Carpet is just a riveting story that from start to finish that will floor anybody who has even a casual interest. Let's shift into old man directors, and I think you and I are both coming at this topic from slightly different angles, but you pitched it first, so I'm going to let you have your say. John Sayles, lay it on me.
Yeah, John Sayles. I feel this game where I'm envious of the happiness that Paul Schrader fans, and Paul Schrader himself is getting this sort of, third, fourth, fifth act. This guy, ever since he made First Reformed, he can regularly go to the studio, shake a hat, and he gets a couple $1 million. I think his budgets are about $5 million or so. And so after First Reformed, he made The Card Counter. And after The Card Counter, he's making this movie down in New Orleans with Joel Edgerton. I forgot the name off the top of my head. But the thing is that it's $15 million over the last few years. He gets an A-list actor. A-list actor works for scale. And Schrader gets to make this movie. I guess he's in his mid-70s. He's hitting 80 soon, if not older. I'm really jealous because John Sayles is out of the game. John Sayles is one of my favorite guys. John Sayles, too. I think he's about 74, 75 years old.
Is that our second podcast where we tackled his career?
Yeah, second or third. Maybe we did G.I. Joe, and then we did Sayles on the third one or something. And, John Sayles has a lot to say. And I think he's always gotten the short shrift. He's a legend in independent filmmaking. But because he's not a visual director, because he's not a cinematic director, he's a storyteller with a novelistic background. He doesn't have that same lustrous reputation as other guys like Jarmusch, who came out of the late 70s, who are, stylists. Certainly not like guys like David Lynch, but no less endemically American than any of them. But it's because if you go back and watch Chicago 7, you go back and watch Mate 1, they behave like books, histories. The acting is incredible. I think he's a really great director.
And good actor as well.
He's a great actor as well. Yeah, he was trained as an actor. He met Strathairn somewhere upstate where they were going to college in New York State. And so the thing is, he's been in the game now. I think his last movie was Go for Sisters, 2013. It's a great movie, absolutely great movie. Edward James Olmos, Lisa K. Hamilton. And I know that he just can't get the money. He must be asking for it. There must be scripts.
But there was a time where he was one of the best script doctors in town and would command pretty hefty fees working on all kinds of films that you would never associate with John Sayles. I don't know if that river has run dry, but I would assume he's sitting on a little nest egg. If he wished to tap into it and make an independent film, he could.
Yeah, the thing is that Schrader, if Schrader gets $5 million a picture, and that's it. I've looked at the budgets. He gets $5 million a picture.
Sayles should go on Facebook like Schrader does and rant and rave all day, every day. And maybe he would be more, have a more visible profile.
He should say the completely ridiculous things that would get anybody else embargoed. But part of Schrader's novelty is that he just looks like an old man. So I would say one of the pinnacle differences between the two of them is that people regard Schrader as having changed the game in the 70s. That when it mattered, he was there on the ground floor, and his partnership with Marty. Between writing Taxi Driver, between making Hardcore, between doing Cat People, I was in the 80s, but Raging Bull, there's a big peak of excellence there at a time when movies
He had that hot streak that's aged very well because he directed Blue Collar, he directed Hardcore, he directed American Gigolo, and then he directed Cat People. That hot streak of 4 in a row for me has aged extremely well, and so it's very easy for people to go back and say, hey, where do I start with Paul Schrader? Just watch the first 4 films he directed, and it's like, God damn, this guy's he's not Martin Scorsese, but he's pretty goddamn good.
And even Mishima's good. That's a magical
Oh, hell yeah,
movie.
Mishima's
There's
fantastic.
a lot going on. But the thing is that Schrader gets to enjoy this reputation. Sayles doesn't. Sayles made very workmanlike movies, very American movies. All these very low to middle class American stories of people who are strivers, either if it was in history, like Mate One and 8 Men Out. You talk about stuff
that's the peak.
Yeah, quasi late 19th, early 20th century. But then a lot of the stuff of him essaying what it's like to be an American in the middle century towards the 80s is also great. He's got a magic touch with that. He's a real humanist
But
director.
in the 90s, during the heyday of Miramax and Dimension and everything, I remember when Lone Star came out. He was right there at the forefront of all the big indie voices out there. So there are movies people can go back and rediscover. He probably just needs to get on social media and just remind people that he's alive and not,
Yeah, well, I think it's a crying shame that he doesn't have a corner of Criterion. His stuff may be streaming on Tubi or Mubi or Shmubi or Flubi or wherever the different sites are. I don't know. Now, granted, some of those movies, like Baby It's You, they can't re-release because the Springsteen music is unwieldy expensive.
Yeah, I saw it for episode, but I haven't seen it since.
It's incredible. Yeah, it's a fantastic movie. Yeah, Lone Star may be his high watermark, but people don't talk about that in that conversation. People don't describe Lone Star. That's his Western. He's always wanted to tell that Western because he's a big fan of Bud Boetticher. Bedecker? Yeah, there you go. Yeah, he's a big fan of
Bud Boetticher.
And he knows that's the stuff he watched when he was a younger man. He wanted to make those, so he finally got a shot. And he made a weird kind of, what'd you call it, noir western or something like that on the board.
Yeah, and it's killer. And Chris Christopherson is fantastic.
Yeah, they're all
and Elizabeth Pena, and damn good flick.
Chris Cooper playing, and Chris Cooper being the role. Anyway, that's my point, is that Sayles is somebody who I think should be getting the sunset effort of making movies best. Because, again, the last few efforts showed no slippage at all. In the way you could look back and look at De Palma's movies. You can go back and look at some of these other guys. I'm not saying they shouldn't be given movies, but there's a grace like given Adrian Lyne, for instance, coming out of retirement, if you want to call it that, to make this movie Deep Water. And the results aren't there. Neither the Palma, the results aren't there either,
Well, this leads into one of the big questions about the end of careers and what directors should do about them. And I guess there's 2 schools of thought that I respond to. Quentin Tarantino obviously has the luxury of being able to pick and choose when he's going to exit. But as Brian De Palma said many times, your career is kind of what happens to you. It's not like Brian De Palma in the 70s mapped out his next 20 years of greatness and said, this is how it's all going to go down. He said he took the jobs as they came up. And sometimes the ebb and flow of a career is beyond your control. And some directors are lucky enough to end on a high note. Some directors end on a career embarrassment. Some get killed or murdered under very mysterious circumstances, like Pier Paolo Pasolini. He ended on Salo, his most notorious movie, but it's not like he just sat back and said, I'm going to end on my most controversial movie and then I'm going to drop the mic and walk away. That's just how it happened. And so I think only a rare, precious few filmmakers ever in history have been able to choose when they exit the stage. And also, there's some directors like Billy Wilder who just loved making movies. He didn't care if the movies were good or bad. He just loved being on the set, loved staying active. And that was just the world in which he operates. And I think that's why you see Ridley Scott in his 80s still making movies. Clint Eastwood in his 90s still making movies. But if you were to think of directors who have either ruined themselves or raised kind of like their stock price with their final films, can you think of great examples where a director either finished strong or finished in such a way where you kind of calls the whole career into question?
The magical mystery of Orson Welles, and how he landed these 2 films which came out 80 years apart from one another, like F for Fake and Other Side of the Wind. Incredible movies.
I still regard Other Side of the Wind as unfinished, so for me, F for Fake is the last movie.
Okay, but all right, let's say if F for Fake is the last movie, there's actually a scene in F for Fake where he's ordering
but he wasn't that old. He was early 50s. Kevin could probably confirm, but he wasn't that old.
No.
It wasn't like he was like 85 and like walking, like kind of doddering onto the set. It just happened that way.
Bob Altman continued to work too. Bob Altman had no weak spots. Some of his movies are better than others.
He got started late. I think MASH was in the early 40s.
Yeah, and he'd done a shitload of TV before that too. No, there's very few directors you can say, well, every single time, Billy Wilder, every single time he set out to do something, he did something. You know, it's like maybe some movies are stronger than others, but there's no weak spots in there. You know, and
well, you're being very generous. I love Billy Wilder, but everybody's got some turkeys.
It's just, but he's a one of a kind, presence in film. This thing, it's like, even as bad as a Hitchcock movie is, it's so bad you can't watch it or don't want to watch it again. There's some definitely like
Torn Curtain.
Family Plot's not that great, but you get my point. I liked watching Family Plot. There's definitely something interesting about it. I don't know. What would you say? Who was on your
directors
list?
who finish strong. There are very few who start and end strong, but Louis Buñuel. I mean, he starts with Chen Andalou in the late 20s and then ends with That Obscure Object of Desire in the late 70s. It's like, oh shit, well, that's 50 years
that's like
of really good filmmaking.
Phases of filmmaking.
Yeah, there are very few directors you can count on one hand who have 50 years of greatness. Bergman would be one of them. But other directors who have finished strong, like J. Lee Thompson, this is obviously not on the level of Buñuel, but he finished with Kinjite, which is this wildly, almost kind of ghastly, grotesque exploitation film with Charles Bronson, but it's a fucking blast to watch.
I love this. You brought this to my attention. I love the fact that J. Lee Thompson, he directed my favorite Planet of the Apes movie too.
And Cape Fear and a bunch of cool stuff. Yeah. So, I mean, J. Lee Thompson is fantastic, but there are a handful of directors who do finish strong. Obviously, Orson Welles with F for Fake. But in terms of directors who just ruin their reputations, Brian De Palma might be the poster child for a director where he obviously loves making movies, but maybe he should have taken a step back after Femme Fatale. That would have been a perfectly fine time to exit center stage.
Snake Eyes, I think, is a superior, unheralded effort. Snake Eyes is so much better than people give it credit.
I need the Rebecca Romaine striptease.
Okay, all right.
My life would be diminished without it.
And the guy we both agree on is Paul Verhoeven. And talk about somebody who went through like 30,000 iterations of his career, reinventing himself each time into a different kind of director.
Yeah. TV in the late 60s with Flores, to his early Dutch period in the 70s, which was magical. His kick-ass Hollywood period, which is still, those are some of my favorite Hollywood movies ever. And now he's having his third act in Europe with Black Book. Tricked, was that the short that he made? Followed by Elle, which was dynamite. And now Benedetta. If he just had his third European phase, he would still be regarded as one of the best directors working today. He just happens to be in his 80s, and he's back to work with Ed Neumeyer soon. I feel like he is kind of best case scenario, but obviously when Alejandro Jodorowsky came out of semi-reclusion to make some more movies after Jodorowsky's Dune raised his profile, made him famous again, I love seeing the old-timers show that they've still got it, so I root for them all the way. And this is a part of being an old man fan. It's easy for me to root for a filmmaker who's older than I am, but not as easy to root for somebody who's younger, like Robert Eggers and Ari Aster. They're younger, but I love them, but like, I'm a total hypocrite. I can read a book by an author in their 20s as long as they wrote it before I was born. Like, I can read This Side of Paradise by Fitzgerald and be like, oh, what a masterful novel. But if some writer in their 20s now writes a novel, like, oh, fuck you, you're some young punk, get out of here. Which is a total, contradiction, but that's just the way like old man fan brain operates. So it's easier for me to watch a director in their 70s, 80s, and 90s who have loved in the past, but some of them do make a complete spectacle of themselves.
But we also notice that this business treats people so terribly, and there is an expiry date on everybody. Women hit it when they're 40, but a director especially...
Unless you're Claire Denis. Claire Denis in her 70s. And
it's easy to get behind a director who is still staying in the game in their 70s and isn't just taking like, oh, I'm directing Jag. A lot of these guys go to TV because there has been a lot of TV now for like 25 years, and now there's even more TV with all the streaming. So you need a lot of people to run a lot of cameras, and they're just essentially journeymen who hang out in Los Angeles.
Who's somebody who's seemed old for a long time but just refuses to die? Like somebody like Carradine Stanton who looked 90 his entire life, going back to like the earliest days. But
Bob Altman did too.
Bob Altman looked. I mean, if you look at him on the set of McCabe and Mrs. Miller, he already looks like a fat old man.
We were thwarted Monty Hellman after the movie Iguana, which came out in '86. Now, I mean, I saw that movie because Pure Cinema Podcast talked about it because it was Monty Hellman's last movie. And it was, they took it away from him. It was sort of a disaster.
He produced Reservoir Dogs, and he stayed in the game.
He stayed in the game, but he didn't get the shot, of making his own films anymore. And he was a guy who clearly had a lot. He changed, not in his own way, he changed cinema because he was there at the 70s.
Well, in the late 60s, he had a chance to make a movie for Roger Corman. He ran out to the desert with Jack Nicholson and Warren Oates. And they just took the budget for one film, and instead they shot two, which is how you get The Shootist and Ride the Whirlwind. Is it the Shooting or The Shootist? I think it's The Shooting. The Shooting and Ride the Whirlwind. that is independent filmmaking at its best. It's like, all right, we got $250,000. We're going into the desert to shoot a Western. Fuck it, making 2 movies. And anyway, I love that whole period. But obviously, cockfighter, 2-lane blacktop. Yeah, I love and adore Monty Hellman. Peckinpah was not that old when he died, but he looked 1,000 because of substance abuse. But I read a great biography. It was either Bloody Sam by Marshall Fine, or maybe it was one of Paul Sedor's books on him, but he was lamenting toward the end of his life, my final movie was only a few minutes long because he shot a Julian Lennon music video.
From Velote, yeah.
And the Osterman Weekend, when you watch it now, if it had been directed by anybody other than Sam Peckinpah, hey, it's a pretty cool early 80s action movie, fine. But when you watch it, like, wait, Sam Peckinpah directed this? Like, you're kidding me. But he had done Convoy, which saw, I mean, the trucker craze of the late 70s is a topic unto itself, whether you're talking Smokey and the Bandit or it's millions of imitators. But Convoy is a blast and had a hit theme song. It's got Ali McGraw and Chris Christopherson.
HBO as a kid.
Ernest Borgnine. That's how I discovered it. You know, Pan and Scan on HBO. Peckinpah had a lot of demons. He loved this. Vodka was more his thing. But he also liked a little booger sugar from time to time, and he was aging in dog years toward the end. If he'd been able to end on Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, home run, but that's just not the way the history books have been written.
I mean, I love Cross of Iron. I love Cable Hogue. I mean, he's one of the poster children for that guy who came up with the hard edge thing, honing his act through TV, making some of these hard-hitting things, but always...
like the Rifleman's Killer Show.
Always had an antagonistic relationship with studio brass. You know, he never, ever didn't really work well.
And he would create it if it wasn't there.
I was able to find 1 or 2 interviews where David Warner discusses working with Peckinpah. And you can't find 2 more dissimilar human beings than this Englishman who grew up outside of Manchester with this incredible skin disease. He had no self-esteem. He was a shitty student. I'm talking about David Warner now, not Peckinpah.
He played basically a child molester in Straw Dogs.
Yeah, and this thing, he was asked to do something. And David Warner describes being asked by this brand in America, somebody completely different, and it's like, I'm going to be in a Western? I wanted nothing more than this. And all the times I've done, I played Prospero in The Tempest, it's like, I'm going to go to the desert and shoot with Jason Robards.
But he's so good, he's like, well, she's as naked as a jaybird's ass. It's like, naked we come into this world, and naked we shall depart, or something along those lines.
And it's amazing that there's this reverence where he almost thinks of him as a father, and David Warner feels so intently about this man. And it's like, if you need ratification from another human being about what kind of artist he was, what kind of man he was, David Warner confirms that not only did he change his career, but he really meant something to human life. That, yes, he was a mess of a man, but I think that endeared him to everybody he worked with. I bet you if Jimmy Coburn was still around.
Hey, you almost love people because of their flaws sometimes, in spite of their flaws. But Hal Ashby, where do you place him in terms of old man directors who had the decreasing returns? Because if you look at Harold and Maude, you look at Shampoo, you're like, oh, this guy made like some of the best films of the 1970s.
Changed the game.
And was a great cutter, and he had so many gifts, but by the end he's doing movies like The Slugger's Wife, like, ooh, that's not as good as Shampoo. So.
Well, 8 Million...
Being There is incredible.
Yeah,
he's got a couple of really good ones.
But I mean, the movie he gets shit on for, 8 Million Ways to Die, I think is it is a slammer. Ashby managed to almost get into that Billy Friedkin lane and tell the story, and he uses Jeff Bridges, he uses Andy Garcia great. Like, it is a Los Angeles crime movie. Ro Arquette is in that one again too. She's absolutely gorgeous. Like these actors at the peak, right at the beginning of the career, where they're had most of their power. And one thing Ashby knew was Los Angeles, I think, and so he was able to be a bard, an essayist of Los Angeles in such an incredible way.
Does he qualify as an old man director? I think he died like at 60 as well.
65, his liver,
Like, what is the cutoff point to be an old man director?
I don't know. Well, I think,
or do you have to just look 1,000?
His insides look like Harry Dean's neck. Yeah. How about that? How about a guy like McTiernan who pissed away the last few years of his career before he went to the Slammer for tax evasion or I don't know what the hell he went away for. Something really stupid.
Yeah, I can't remember why he went. I did a podcast on him, but once I move on to the next one, I kind of flush out all the old knowledge and replace it with the new.
He was like espionage or something like that, where he got thrown away. But it's like,
taxes are optional.
Yeah, well, he should have had another act, and it's like that's a man who defined the techno thrill of the late.
Yeah, he made my favorite action movie of the '80s, Predator.
He made 3 of my favorite action movies: Die Hard, Predator, and Red October. And that's a guy. October. McTiernan was a guy, among all the weirdest origin stories, he was a theater director from local rep in San Diego.
Yeah, he was good with actors. He wasn't an action guy at all.
He jumped into acting. It's somebody's not going to jump from Beetlejuice the musical on Broadway right now to making Predator. It's just not going to happen. They don't find those guys.
And every person in Predator, they do the best work they ever did. But I guess, old man directors. He was asked to exit center stage before his time perhaps had drawn to a close. For all the Egypts out there like myself, perhaps explain what a canon even means, apart from blowing someone's brains out, etc., and how they've been utilized in literature, music, art, etc. Because before we talk about AFI 100 or Sight and Sound or Empire, everybody's always come up with these lists of the canonical films or Martin Scorsese's favorites or Spike Lee's favorites. What is the role of the canon in the arts historically before an era where nothing really matters because it all disintegrates into white noise?
It's almost one of the worst things you can do to an art because it winds up creating this orthodoxy. I feel like that's where it comes from. Classical music, painting, sculpture, art, a lot of it biblical based. But the idea like our film canon is this thing that people started agreeing on after 80, maybe 50 years of the art form, when they started saying, here's what.
I guess it goes back to like the Cinematheque in Paris when some very wise individuals started to realize you don't need to just break down these prints for their raw materials to be recycled. Maybe we can preserve some of these prints for future generations. Okay. Maybe it's a good idea to hang on to Charlie Chaplin's films. Maybe it's a good idea to hang on to Jean Renoir's films. And you start seeing the first generation of people at Cahiers du Cinema really coming up with what, from their point of view, is the canonical film history of like the 20s, 30s, and 40s. Guys like Godard, guys like Truffaut, who are like, these directors matter. These are the auteurs. These are the authors of the film. And you really start seeing the preservation of film culture at the time, which immediately took root in New York. People like Andrew Sarris fell in love with this idea, and we were off to the races, and the obsession with film history began.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, it doesn't mean these things now. The canon means something different because we're in an age of hot takes. But now it's this idea of people just trying to show how pointy their head is, where they're just creating a list of here's what you should see. Either to say, yeah, we're going to establish the primacy of movies that people thought had fallen by the wayside, or kids don't know what these movies are, or it's to tear it down, on the other hand, and say, well, we're not going to talk about Vertigo, we're not going to talk about these movies from yesteryear, we're going to talk about a new canon of movies that we're going to say apply today. They're not just based on
that's an old idea.
ideas.
Luis Buñuel, who we mentioned yesterday, a filmmaker I love, he had an idea in like the 20s of burning down the Louvre so that art could just kind of start over. It's like, yeah, forget about the canonical paintings. Let's burn it all down, get it going again. It's a very revolutionary act. And every generation has that. There is always that part of every new generation that should try to destroy and disregard the previous just to create room for the new stuff so you don't get completely, going back to the idea of nostalgia. It can choke off new creativity. So while I love lists and creating lists and so on and so forth, what I don't like the idea of saying, this is the canon of the golden age of Hollywood, and no new movies are allowed to be added to it. The canon is not complete, and Tarantino's a big advocate of this, where he's always refused to accept the idea that we know right now what the best 20th century movies are. There's always cool stuff waiting to be discovered. I don't want to tear down the old canon because it's disintegrating before our eyes, like sand going between our fingers just through just the atrophy of time already, but I do want to add some new movies.
One of the things I tasked you with, and myself at the same time, for the purpose of this exercise was to think of 5 movies. You're going to throw 5 at me? I don't know. I didn't think you were going to come at me with, and I was hoping to surprise you with 5 movies. We grew up understanding that we have to go out and see Rear Window. I get it, and I have. I've done all those things. But it's like, what is our own hunting turned up in terms of films that we think, well, it's clearly this is just a matter of omission or a lack of people seeing it, but this is just as good as something else along the way. But it's just, it's outside of that orthodoxy of the AFI Top 100.
And Scorsese embraced that philosophy when he worked with the BFI in the 90s and created this extraordinary documentary, A Personal Journey Through American Filmmaking with Martin Scorsese. It's about 6 hours long. Seen a lot of incredible movies because of it. But he said, look, I'm not going to celebrate Hitchcock in this because Francois Truffaut's already been there, done that. He did the Hitchcock-Truffaut interviews. We got the documentary, et cetera, and so forth. I'm trying to celebrate the unloved, the unsung films so that people will go back and see. Maybe F.W. Murnau's Sunrise or Sunshine? Sunrise from the late 20s. Sunshine's a science fiction movie from the 21st century. But he's always trying to shine a light on the unloved movies. And I've got some bangers that I've chosen.
I can't wait.
And I have to credit John Waters with being the first to kind of steer me in this direction because one of these movies, he said, Not only is it the best movie ever made, it's the best movie that will ever be made. Can you guess what that movie is?
Oh my God, Waters said that?
John Waters
oh,
said
man,
this.
I almost inclined to say it's one of his, but he would never be so bold as to do
No,
that.
this is a little movie called Faster Pussycat, Kill, Kill.
I like where you're going with this.
And all 5 of my new canon movies all come from the same source, the great Russ Meyer. And I'll say that Faster Pussycat, Kill, Kill, Beyond the Valley of the Dolls, Super Vixens, Beneath the Valley of the Ultra Vixens, and for a 5th, it can be any of his other movies from Motor Psychos to the original Vixen to Harry, Cherry, and Raquel. I think the entire body of work of Russ Meyer belongs in the canon, but of course it will never go there because it has sex, which is still shameful and to be frowned upon to this day. And I find his exploitation films, his drive-in movies to be so much more rewarding and so much more enjoyable upon multiple reviewings than many other movies from the 60s and 70s that would play in a similar format or a similar venue. You want to talk about Grindhouse, you can talk about Jack Hill, you can talk about a lot of great filmmakers from that time, but I would put Russ Meyer alongside, Don Siegel, or I would put him, maybe not Sam Peckinpah, but maybe Robert Aldrich, like some of these guys who are making really cool, kick-ass flicks in the 60s and 70s. Put Russ Meyer in with all those
Sam
guys.
Fuller, yeah, guys like that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, combat photographer in World War II, goes to work for Playboy in the early 50s, develops a unique aesthetic. And as Roger Ebert pointed out years ago, you can watch any frame from any Russ Meyer movie that he ever made, and within seconds say that's a Russ Meyer movie.
Yeah, sure.
If that doesn't make you an auteur, I don't know what else does. But we'll get back. We'll circle back to the great Russ Meyer. Give me some new canon that you got percolating in your brain.
Okay, well, one movie I saw recently with our mutual friend Matthijs van der Roost. There's a French director named Philippe de Broca who's made a bunch of movies in the 60s and 70s. He made this movie with Belmondo, the great Belmondo, the recently deceased Belmondo.
Tony Celefave.
Tony Celefave, a movie called That Man from Rio, 1964. And it is an incredible movie. I mean, I thought I knew what Belmondo was all about. Belmondo did his own stunts, which I don't think I was quite aware of that. And
he's a hurricane of a human being.
He is. It was like he was Jackie Chan before Jackie Chan in the way, it wasn't just doing stunts like, setups, gags like Buster Keaton did or something like that.
And handsome in ways that only a really ugly person can be handsome, like very charismatic but unconventionally
in a perfectly French way, no less. It's an adventure movie. He's like chasing around the globe. It's Indiana Jones sort of before there's Indiana Jones a little bit. And the beautiful part is that Rio, based on like the Gilberto music and samba, like there was this Brazilian thing that was entering culture.
The girl from Ipanema.
Yeah, the same way that like Hawaiian stuff had gotten into American culture in the 40s and 50s. There was the idea of the luau and the poo-poo platter and the pineapples. Like Brazil was that for the late 60s. There was definitely, it's sexy, it's warm, it's the beach, it's.
Stan Getz and Gilberto, when they collaborated on that album just called Getz Gilberto, it was a sensation.
Yeah.
Well, we swore we weren't going to do deep dives on all 5 movies, so give me some more.
The Sicilian Clan, 1969, Henri Verneuil. It fits right in with that Melville style of policier movie that he was doing. You want to talk about the swagger, the beauty of French cinema, the way the Frenchmen move the camera, and this guy Henri Verneuil. Maybe I'm probably not even pronouncing the guy's name correct. Look, I'm a Melville guy up and down, and there's so many beautiful things inside Melville's repertoire. But this guy dipped in and out of that same sort of cool style. And the beauty thing about the Sicilian Clan is that it's got Delon, all young, coming right out of doing Les Samurai. He looks as best as he ever, as good as he ever looked. But this movie, it's got him. It's got Jean Gabin, right, from No Touche Pas La Grisby.
The John Wayne of French cinema.
The John Wayne of French cinema. It's like using him as the older man, exactly the way that you'd hoped. He's the sort of crime boss of the family. And who's the cop chasing them both? Lino fucking Ventura.
Oh, cool.
Right? It's like, can you think of a bigger power play of all these guys who came out of that same atmosphere of doing gritty French noir? And they're all in the same movie. It's got such a great feel to it.
Yeah, from the mid-50s to the mid-70s, French noir came on strong, and so many bona fide classics, all of which belong in whatever canon it is that we are concocting out of thin air.
Elio Petri's movie from 1970, An Investigation of a Citizen Above Suspicion. Now,
It's a mouthful.
Yeah, it is. Now, the Italian title, I'm sure, is a lot cooler than however I'm making it sound. But this guy, Elio Petri, maybe I'm a dumbass. I had never heard of him before I started watching all of his movies in a row. And we went on a dive. I mean, he made a movie called The 10th Victim, which is maybe the movie he's most known for. I think that was like 1966, 1967. Elio Petri, at his heart, was a Northern Italian with real leftist labor sympathies in his mind. And he had a big suspicion of power and authority. And this movie, this is Jean-Marie Volonté, plays like the police chief in a town somewhere in the north of Italy. And he like misses, he blows a gasket, right? He misses a screw goes loose in him. And he decides to instead use his power to start doing fucked up things off to the side, blatantly and loudly, to see if he'll get caught. Nobody looks his way because he's a moral pillar. He's the head of the police. And he's almost like outraged. He's testing the boundaries of society, saying, how hollow can we be that we don't notice deviance, even if I'm the one doing it? It is a great noir movie. It has all the Morricone score, absolutely beautiful. And again, Volonté was his guy. He made Elio Petri and Volonté made a bunch of movies together.
Gotcha.
And it's just magic. Again, an Italian dude in a whole sea of Italian dudes who is not acknowledged at all, made some incredible bangers, and he's the kind of guy.
Well, to be fair, Italian genre cinema in the 60s and 70s was so strong, you got to make a big, bold effort to stand out. Number 4, what do you got for us?
Charles Burnett's To Sleep with Anger, 1990.
Oh, wow.
Now, the thing is, everybody...
He's been on Marcus's podcast many times.
Yeah, I know. I love it. I love it. That's why I watched it, because Marcus and Scott over on Zebras in America was such big evangelists for it. 1990, Danny Glover makes that and Predator 2 in the same year. I know, hardcore. Talk about doing one for them and one for me. But Glover always put his money where his mouth is. He was producing movies from way back. So To Sleep with Anger was the first time I saw any of this information about the African-American diaspora from the South to the West. You know, people had come from, the whole movie is about people who had migrated to Los Angeles from the South in like the 30s and 40s and 50s. And these were these people knew, they had memories of what it was like being down in Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, and they still had these, you know, the country feel. More than that, though, this movie has a sort of weird, tiny little supernatural bent where Danny Glover may in fact be the devil. And in my last, I'll give him my number 5 choice as a director I guarantee you've never heard of, and this is one of the wonderful explorations I've had from moving to Holland over the last 2.5 years. A guy named Alex van Warmerdam, Ober, comes out in 2006. And it is a little bit of a surrealist picture. If you know the work of, for instance, Aki Kaurismäki, the Finnish director, there is this real deadpan type, po-faced, everyday style to what this guy does.
Is there any other country that's embraced this stuff, or is he just a homegrown hero?
Now, he had one movie. This guy had one movie in Cannes, 2013, a movie called Borkman, which people have seen. I know Martin Kessler has seen Borkman, and I've been evangelizing for this guy since Matthias brought it in. Matthias is the one who let me know that this guy's a thing. It looks great. He's a visual artist. He's been at it for a long time. I would just say go in blind. It's tough to find. That's the thing. It's you need it. It's Dutch with subtitles. But the thing is, this is the movie that Matthias van der Rohe started me on Van Warmerdam with. I would absolutely recommend anybody find any of his movies you can, whether it's Borgman or Ober or the movie, he just came out with a movie called Number 10. But he's absolutely someone you should find out. So this is like a icebreaker for the micro canon of Alex van Warmerdam and his particular Dutch version of cinema.
When you're first discovering all this great stuff, that's when your film love is at its most feverish, its most intense. If you at any point just accept the idea that you have kind of seen the canon and it's done, it's very easy to just kind of let that be something you let go. It's like in the past. If you're not constantly trying to add new movies to whatever canon might exist in your head, you've kind of given up. And I'll never forget reading the New York Times Magazine article in the late 90s when they had Woody Allen and Martin Scorsese come in and talk about their films at that time. And Woody was talking about how he hadn't seen a movie in a long time and didn't give a damn. And Martin Scorsese said that for the first time he'd seen Dziga Vertov's experimental late 20s Russian film, Man with the Movie Camera, for the first time.
Legendary.
And that he had been completely floored by it, and that he went back to work on Monday morning, probably bringing out the dead, whatever he was working on at the time. But that he went into that work week completely, totally inspired. And at age 22 or 23, I was like, fuck yeah, like I love that movie, like that's so cool. But as you get older, it is harder to develop new tastes. It's harder to remain open. It's harder to remain curious. Do you have any kind of tricks of the trade to keep your mind in like a sponge-like mode where you are open to new filmmakers, you are open to new experiences, so that the canon will always keep expanding?
Absolutely. And it's simple. Listen to smart people when they tell you what to watch. Honestly, One of the best things, because I'm a dumbass I don't have my compass spins in a circle like I'm standing next to a magnet. The best things I've watched, fucking hands down in the last 8 years, has been what smarter people have told me to watch, is what you've said to watch on the show. Every single one of the guests you've had on Wrong Reel, whether it's Marcus or Martin or Matthias or Jacob or John
or David
or
Lambert,
Sky or Lambo,
Kevin
any of these
Marr,
guys that come through here. I know I'm quoting for the converted here. Yeah, the thing is, it's like that has expanded. Listen to this Pink Smoke guys, for fuck's sake. Listen to Pure Cinema podcast. Part of this, the idea, what really inspired this, certainly.
I'm going to add one to the mix as I choke on scotch. The Brady Sayles podcast, which is the podcast I quote most frequently, in an era where it's so easy to get cynical and bitter and hate everything, etc. That is, for me, the most intense kind of home for diehard film conversations that I've been exposed to over the last 8 or 9 years, where whether he's talking to Bogdanovich or Walter Hill or Tarantino, it is where a true cinephile will feel most at home, where the canon is alive and well, film history is alive and well, they're constantly making fresh discoveries, and also, to borrow your phrase, shitting on other movies from a great height. They are also wildly pessimistic, as only people in their late 50s can be. People who grew up in the 70s going to see Days of Heaven in the theater, knowing what that's like to experience it firsthand. So in terms of listening to smart people, I just want to add the BEE or the BEE podcast to your list that you just mentioned.
This canon exercise for me, the reason I brought it up is because I want it ongoing for me. This has to pay back to me. I want this as a reflexive exercise.
Yeah, and also for the people who love the AFI Top 100 list, I'm not saying don't go back and watch all the George Cukor films from the 30s and 40s. I've done episodes on George Cukor. I love George Cukor. I mean, Philadelphia Story is one of the most wildly entertaining movies you will ever see while alive on this planet. We're just saying, add all this other shit on top of the existing canon. So if you love the Golden Age, keep your love of the Golden Age ironclad and intact, but just make a little room for Russ Meyer in your heart. It's a guy who would run out into the desert and a couple of hot actors and come back later, a few weeks later, with a vintage piece of Americana with all sorts of interesting societal commentary and comedy and action and thrills. And but it's real filmmaking. Since the days of Game of Thrones, we've seen this whole new era of the flaccid penis writ large on all of our screens. And I think it's total bullshit. On one hand, I totally embrace the idea that now if you're going to make a movie or show like Euphoria, instead of showing girls tatas, you show guys limp penis, and that's, people clutch their pearls, and it's scandalous and shocking and all the things that you want. Whether it's gratuitous or not gratuitous is up to the beholder. But the undiscovered country remains the erect penis.
Yeah.
Why, if I'm an actor and I'm about to do a scene in Game of Thrones, like Bronn surrounded by 3 working girls, raising hell in King's Landing before going into battle, I'm not going in cold and flaccid. I'm going in rock hard, like a goddamn Eiffel Tower. Why are the actors not fighting this battle on their own behalf? It would be in my contract. I'm not allowed to go in unless I've had a fistful of Viagra, etc. But apparently, my loose understanding is that the erect penis is so scandalous and so perverse that it would technically take you into NC-17, X-terrain, whatever the case might be. But the flaccid penis is less threatening. Where do you stand on #FreeTheErection?
No, that's the only explanation there can possibly be in our Hell's a Pop and Anything Goes age. Where it's like we're awash in pornography. The idea, the erect penis, everyone's seen one. I mean, Christ, they're on the street right here.
I haven't seen it for far too long.
It's been far too long. We have to go out there and take care of this when we get done with this. No, it's still this morality shit we're left over with.
Yeah.
This is still, especially if it's the Northeast, it's Catholic bullshit, or it's evangelical bullshit, or it's some sort of puritanical bullshit. Why does the erect schwang have this power over society where it's the one thing we really haven't, one transgression? Look, don't get me wrong, there's art
if it's
films.
Michelangelo carving David and putting it up in a museum in Florence, fine, do his little acorn penis.
He's a grower, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, shit, it's like, if I'm an actor and you're concerned with your image, why would you not demand that to be shown in all your glory?
Yeah, and this is a real also side effect, like the fact that so many queer filmmakers still haven't gotten into making mainstream films and filming sex scenes, where you can show all the tits and all the merc and bushes you want in the world, but you still can't show an erect schwang. And if it's going to be 2 dudes together, that's still not normalized.
Episode 3, Season 2 of Euphoria is when you see the flashback of the father character remembering his wrestling buddy. They had an unacknowledged gay relationship until finally the night that they do the dirty deed. He wakes up the next day, finds out his girlfriend's pregnant, He starts bawling. That relationship will never happen. But even there, with those two guys, in the hands of the most audacious filmmaker on HBO, hung like a baby's fist. Yeah, even on Euphoria, the erection is.
No,
not
I mean
yet been freed.
it's gonna. You need more than just.
This is
one,
the undiscovered country.
You need more than maybe you need a Paul Verhoeven or somebody like that to come at it first, where it's like someone has to just continually beat the drum and stretch that Overton window.
I mean, he would show his cock and balls on set.
He did. Yeah,
When
but
the
it never got on
actors were acting
camera.
shy. He and his DP on the set of Starship Troopers dropped their pants to their ankles.
They got in the shower. Him and Yost
Say, look, it's no big deal. In Europe, we don't care.
Yeah.
Everybody stripped down.
Exactly, we're fine. So the thing is, somebody's got to do the Overton window where they keep doing it over and over again to make it less and less a thing. And all of a sudden, somewhere over here, you're going to get...
You know who did it?
Who?
All roads lead back to Russ Meyer, where he would even add a sound like a wooden spoon brrr, on a table as the erection would be unveiled. And so he beat everybody to the punch by decades. Once again, all roads lead to Russ Meyer.
But my vote for the least gratuitous, most necessary, most textually obligatory nudity on film. It's one of my favorite movies of all time.
Pretty Baby.
The Bikini Car Wash Company.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I mean, that movie, you want to talk about the new canon? I would say Christy Ducati, as I don't even know what her name was, with her toplessness. That is so much more of an enriching performance. It's incredible. That movie is so much fun. And I will quote myself when I say that the one thing the Bikini Car Wash Company does to you is it makes the business of being a naked lady look fun. It is joyful. It is a Southern California romp, an exhibition of what it is to be happy on planet Earth, to explore, being under the sun, eating good food,
Are you
breathing
pitching Wrong
clean
Reel
air.
After Dark? I loathe and despise Easter egg culture, and I loathe and despise Easter egg commentary, but I'm the first to acknowledge that I can be a good sport about it. I am wearing an Easter egg here, a 21 tie from the 21 Club, which we tackled in our first short film together, The Movies That Define New York Part 1, when we tackled Sweet Smell of Success. So I can be a good sport, I can play ball. I guess, what's the difference between an Easter egg versus paying homage? When does it kind of destroy or distort or distract from a great screenplay, great music, a great well-delivered line, a brilliantly edited sequence? Like the things that, the nuts and bolts, the grammar of filmmaking are what make a movie, give it its heart, its beating heart, its pulse. But a movie, going back to Ready Player One, all it is Easter eggs.
It is junk food. It's empty calories. It's fucking cheese curls. The reason why people, I would eat Doritos all day unless you called on me and said, Bill, I need you to go in front of the camera and you need to be in some fucking shape to do it, and you can't have a massive ring of orange on your mouth. I'd be sitting there just dissolving into a gout-ridden pile of disease and, just watching stupid things all day unless otherwise challenged to be a better human being in my dotage. And I think that Easter egg culture, is there because it rewards this. It's this little endorphin hit right along the way. It's like when you watch...
There's no translation for it in Chinese film culture.
It is a reward, a personalized reward for everybody who can watch the background of The Mandalorian. And you see a hammerhead alien walk past, it's like, oh, that's Momo Nadon, he's the guy in the Expanded Universe guy.
Something I recognize, therefore this must be good.
Yeah, right, exactly. I'm sure there were some of those in The Batman. I couldn't tell you how many at some point,
Yeah, Batman Year One Easter eggs, Long Halloween Easter eggs, etc.
There's a difference between, Nolan included little bits and pieces. He freighted that stuff into his work.
What about somebody who only watches Easter egg videos and doesn't watch the movies? Like, read the TV guide, you don't need a TV.
Yeah, well, that's part of, but that's the intersection of YouTube culture. That's the idea that you don't need to watch it because I watched the video about it. I'm guilty of some of that stuff too, where it's like, well, I don't have enough time in the world to see what's going on with the show. I had watched a shitload of content about Game of Thrones before I even dipped into it. I know everything. It was post-Red Wedding. I knew who all these characters were. I knew all the plot twists. I knew who the Hound was. I knew why the Hound's face was fucked up, all this stuff. That made all the difference. It's like, well, I don't need to hit the ground catching up to who Catelyn Stark is and all these people.
I can just do the old-fashioned way and read the goddamn books, which is what I would recommend.
You can do that, exactly. I'm not going to read any books. But people love They love the Easter egg culture because it rewards. I mean, it's an endorphin thing. It's, you know what it winds up being? Our good friend Kevin Marr once talked about gamification. You know, like if you turn anything into a small hunt with a reward system, I mean, you know, you can't even learn a fucking language now on a phone without it having, oh, congratulations, you got 10 experience points for going through the verbs today. You know, it's like you have to gamify everything, treat everything like an app. It means, like, in some ways, the studios know this, that whether it's the screenwriter themselves, the director, the producers, they're larding it with these small things, saying, well, look, this movie's going to be a piece of shit.
Like in a Sam Raimi movie, having a street performer playing the Spider-Man theme song from the 60s. It's an Easter egg, or is it an homage, or a bit of both? But
now, with Raimi, I can't be cynical about that. With Raimi, it's 100% on board because that's Raimi.
Well, when I love it, when it's done well, he and Wes Craven had this wonderful kind of competitive rivalry in the 80s when they're both the kings of horror, when they would tip their hat to each other's movies in their own movies. You're watching Nightmare on Elm Street, Evil Dead's playing on TV. Or you're watching an Evil Dead movie and a poster for The Hills of Eyes is on the wall. Like, wait, what the fuck's going on here? How come these guys keep referencing each other's movies?
The Thing is playing in Halloween on the TV.
Yeah, and so that kind of stuff I find to be cool. I guess where they lose me is when people only care about the trivia but don't care about what is the grammar that makes an emotionally engaging story. Yeah. What sends the chills and electricity up through your arms and neck where you're just being carried along by the hand of the artist. That's where they lose me. But even you and I, we played ball with our second short, The Movies That Define New York, with all that stuff about the hobo with the high kick, with the wanted signs and Dead or Alive, et cetera, and so forth. So once again, I'm not a total curmudgeon stick in the mud who's like ranting and raving about Easter egg culture, but it's when it eclipses everything else, that's when I just vomit it right back on the screen.
It has to do with, again, who is interpreting the grammar of film, and even do they understand the grammar of film, and what's left over at this point after it having been degraded so much by shitty storytelling.
Also, with Marvel and DC both going all in on their multiverse storylines, for the next 5 years, all we're going to get is Easter eggs. Oh, that's a person from a different interpretation of the movie that was done on TV 20 years ago, but they're popping up because it's an Easter egg. Yay, now we're all having fun. And that's what I worry about, that both franchises are just going to go all in on nothing but Easter eggs moving forward. And it's like, oh, what if you don't like it? It means you're a spoiled sport or a curmudgeon or whatever. Like, no, I just want a fucking story.
Well, the Tribbles and the blue antenna Andorians from Star Trek Disco are all Easter eggs.
Discovery is awash in Easter eggs.
It is, and it's
it does not make it a good Star Trek show.
Well, it's like that's not set up for the audience who's actually watching.
Star Trek became at a certain point about itself as opposed to about
sci-fi,
exploration.
Larger
when
issues.
you watch the motion picture, which a lot of people shit on, it is still about exploring the unknown. But at a certain point, they pivot. Oh well, every show or movie from now on is just going to be about old Star Trek. Well, at that point, it's just creative masturbation.
Ooh. Oh, it's sweet. Ushkaba, as the Celts say. This year, 2022, is the 30th anniversary of Image Comics. That incredible summer that blasted us open, changed the nature of comic book industry. We were the perfect age. How did you live through that summer? What does Image mean to you?
Oh, man. Well, I was ground zero. That hyper-masculine, pouch-obsessed, knife-obsessed, hourglass figure-obsessed, kind of like teen, rocket fuel era of comic book creation. I was already a rabid fan of all those creators when they were at other companies. I was there from day one, and I have very strong memories of the early days of Image. And then a few years later, I wasn't reading comics at all. And then I have very strong memories and very positive memories of Image. 20, 25 years later, after they'd made a transition into a completely different era. But that whole boom and bust cycle of comics in the early 90s, I helped fuel it in both directions. Buying all the crap, all the hologram covers, all the everything. Buying the number ones, buying the variant covers. I was like, it was like an investment portfolio, like getting behind Rob Liefeld and Todd McFarlane and all these creators and Eric Larson, and then seeing by only a few years later that Marvel was going down in flames, DC was going down in flames, Image was going down in flames, and the industry contracted by roughly 80%. It was a fascinating time to be a comic book fan, but luckily, right as it was flaming out, I was falling in love with cinema, so it just filled the void that had been previously occupied by comics. But it was a glorious time to be alive for a few short months.
You were
where
15 years old, right? That
summer '92, I turned 16.
16.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of they talk about the perfect age to have this comic book company launched after coming out of the doldrums of the late 80s.
Take it back a few months.
Yeah.
Because I think most people weren't reading comics then, obviously, and a lot of people weren't reading Image, but what did it mean to have Rob Liefeld, Jim Lee, Todd McFarlane, these guys who were selling, in some cases, millions of comics a month, sales that would be a wet dream today, where comics will celebrate selling 50,000 copies a month. To have a comic like X-Force #1 sell a couple million, to have Spider-Man sell a couple million, to have X-Men #1 by Jim Lee sell, I think, 7 or 8 million, and to have them all say, you know what? Fuck you, Marvel, we're jumping ship and we're creating our own brand, because I think that's a story that's lost on non-comic book readers.
Yeah, imagine it's a labor movement the likes of which had rarely happened before. Imagine if all of Walt Disney's, what do they call them, the 7 old men, the guys who made all those Golden Age cartoons, if they just said to Walt in 1951, fuck you, Walt, we're going to make our own studio. It may have floundered, it may not have, but it would have been a gigantic brain drain of everything that made Walt Disney Studio the go-to shop for animation back in the Golden Age. Yeah, in fact, you talk about how many issues they were selling. I mean, anything in print would have loved those numbers. I mean, today would be a wet dream, not just comic books, but anything on paper that gets spat out by a press.
Yeah, the New York Times bestseller list keeps kind of changing the numbers that are required to make the list.
318 copies this week. That makes you #1 on the list, that sort of thing. Yeah, magazines, any periodical would create. I mean, that was the heyday of print. It was also the last 6 seconds of the viability of print. But yeah, the idea being that these guys, in some cases, like a guy like Silvestri, Valentino had been around for a while. Let's state the facts. Let's say all right. So we're talking about Eric Larson, Todd McFarlane, Jim Lee, Rob Liefeld, Jim Valentino, Mark Silvestri, Will Spartaccio, the Image 7. Right, exactly.
That was the lucky 7.
Yeah, and so they each had different profiles in the industry. They for the most part, they all worked on Marvel comic books. They mostly worked on mutant-related books, with the exception of Valentino, who came out of...
Well, Larson was on Spidey,
Yeah.
and McFarlane was on Spidey. Because
Yeah.
you had Larson on Amazing Spider-Man, and then you had Todd McFarlane on just Spider-Man. He was
Adjective
writing and drawing himself.
Or they called it Advantageous Spider-Man,
Yeah.
based on one of those shitty word balloons in Spider-Man #1. Yeah, so the thing is that was their flagship of those, the two franchises, Spider-Man and X-Men. And, those guys got propelled. And it was the moment where everybody knew up to that point that the creators sold books, but Marvel's creeping corporate structure, the guy who was running Marvel at the time was this guy named Terry Stewart, who was a genial, old-fashioned Southerner. And much like anything, he was a brake pusher. He would hit the brakes all the time and make sure nothing went too fast. They had very antiquated notions about what the relationship was of the company and the creators. And comic book creators had traditionally been shat upon from a great height. Yeah. Even the masters...
Going back to the 30s.
Going back to the 30s, the whole point of you getting into comics is that you sold away certainty, you sold away financial solvency for the opportunity to make something you'll never own.
The guy who wrote all the early Batman stories, Bill Finger, died in poverty.
But the idea being that these guys came up with a system where you're just supposed to eat shit and be happy about it, right? I mean, guys have been doing this for years. I mean, you could say talents that I think dwarf theirs, guys like Perez, guys like Byrne. But these guys, they were slick, mulleted. 90s disobedience is so important. The idea that there was that aesthetic of the skateboarder and
rock stars.
Yeah, rock stars. Like, hey man, these aren't
anti-authority.
Yeah, this isn't your father's yogurt. This isn't a tube that you squirt in your mouth when you're on your fucking skateboard, man. This is Go-Gurt. That's the kind of
Marvel at
attitude
the
these guys
time
had.
said you weren't even allowed to have your characters break the frame of the panel, but that was part of what the dynamism of what made them so popular to teenage boys was how the drawings would leap off the page. When Jim Lee would draw Psylocke and Wolverine and Jubilee going on a mission, they would leap off the page into your imagination, and that's what was driving books. The writers for teenage boys were almost inconsequential. The art was driving the sales, at least at that time.
And the writers for Teenage Boys were the same guys who were writers for Teenage Boys in 1971. It was still guys like Roy Thomas. They had not budged in their...
Jim Starlin, all these badasses.
Some guys were able to, Chris Claremont had modernized for these, but a lot of these guys, the Michelinis of the world, these guys are great, but they're really stodgy, really hidebound guys. It was the art that was moving the page. And the fact that guys like Todd McFarlane and Liefeld had no use for conventional, like Bern Hogarth trained anatomy lessons.
Yeah, I mean, their sense of perspective is
questionable at best.
Juvenile at best.
Yeah, juvenile at best. And it's like people like McFarlane because his body looked like it was made of rubber. There was no bones in any of these things. It was cross-hatched to oblivion. You know, a guy like Liefeld was just all about pure dynamism without any fundamentals, creating human body.
Which I can forgive him when he's like 19 and, you know, young rock star, but even decades later, still drawn the same way. It's like, oh, okay, well.
But here's the thing, right? You get
Jim Lee kept getting better.
Yeah, Jim Lee. And the thing is, I think the best of all those guys was Silvestri. Silvestri had been on X-Men when I
during Inferno and all these incredible eras.
Fan. Yeah, Silvestri. He wasn't the oldest of them, but he was among the oldest of them, and he kind of came out more from the fundamentals background. He was the fusion.
I fell in love with each and every single character he was drawing: Rogue, Dazzler, Psylocke, and Storm. All four of them.
Madeline Pryor.
I was obsessed with all of them.
He looked incredible. That was like that. Talk about a real transition from the way the 90s were. Silvestri, to me, was the first guy to actually do that.
And amongst the seven, they regarded him as the best.
And that's what's amazing. So you put all these guys together, and then the labor movement of essentially billions of dollars in comic books being, you know, we're going to take this out. We're going to do our own thing. And we don't know.
For people who've not heard about it, explain the meeting that they have at both Marvel and DC with Todd McFarlane doing the talking.
Yeah, well, I forget if they were in New York coincidentally or if they came. I think it was a mixture. Some of them were in New York because they were there to do this labor action. Some of them were there, and they were there for meetings with the other companies. But there was some back channel. Todd McFarlane was the one who was scoping around, slapping people on the shoulders, pinching them, trying to say, look, what we need to do is leave Marvel all at the same time. They're not going to know what's going to hit them, and we're going to tell them we're starting our own company to compete with them. And this is a big fuck you for saying the characters are what sells the book. Spider-Man is what sells the book. Wolverine is what sells the book, and the creators are all second tier, insubstantial, interchangeable kind of stuff. And Todd McFarlane's whole thing was, well, we got to do it all together. Like, we're going to pull away all of Marvel's market cap.
And it doesn't work unless we get Jim Lee on board. And Jim Lee was a company man. He dreamed of being...
He was a child. He was a child.
Yeah, but he also, he liked to have a nice, consistent, well-paying job. Yeah. He had a kid already. Like, he wasn't necessarily the rebel rock star that Robert Liefeld or Todd McFarlane was at that time.
No, the beautiful thing is that Jim Lee, born in Korea, he was a SoCal guy, young guy. He was a pre-med. I think his parents would have been really happy for him to become a doctor. Yeah. As the pride of all my Korean friends from Southern California, all their parents would have been very happy if they had gone pre-med somewhere. He didn't. He decided to draw, and I think his parents thought it as a little frivolous. So he had his ice was thinner. He didn't really have as much support in terms of this comic. Even though he was among the best and most successful, he didn't think of himself that
Punisher, way. War Journal, all kinds of killer
Alpha
stuff.
Flight, there's some really good stuff in there. You know, they knew they were going to have to work the hardest on him because he already felt like comics was indulgence to begin with. There was already shame for not being a doctor. Even though he was really serious, he put a lot of work into what he did. Anyway, McFarlane pulls rabbits out of hats all over the place in Manhattan that day. They get everybody on the same page.
We need to know by 7 a.m. tomorrow if you're in.
Right, and we're going to walk into Terry Stewart's office and say, this is not a negotiation. This is a mass exodus. We're quitting. You know, it's like this. We're not saying, hey, up our page rate. We're not saying give us ownership. It's like we are leaving and starting our own company. They got everybody on the page, and they went to Marvel. And the hilarious story is that Terry Stewart had no idea what he's dealing with.
He probably thought they were negotiating.
And the best part of the story is that outside of Terry Stewart's office, Tom DeFalco, who is the EIC of Marvel for a good couple of years, and again, no one more hidebound than him in that old tradition. That guy came up and, it was all about protecting the brand. He had no love for the creators any more than anybody else did. His ear was pressed to the door. He was eavesdropping, thinking, oh my God, this is seismic. Terry Stewart has no idea what's going on. These guys are leaving. There goes our market cap.
Yeah, the Beatles are leaving the building.
And he actually falls in. Apparently the door was ajar. He fell in on the carpet and tried to pretend like he was just walking by, like picking up printer paper or something like that. Here's the capper, is that after they're done, they're at 387 Park Avenue South. And I know that because it was an intern in 95 at Marvel, and that's where their offices were at the time. Then they march uptown, I think to the 50s, lower 50s is where DC was before they moved out to Burbank. There's a couple offices in DC. Then I can't remember if it was Dick Giordano or who the Prexy over at DC was, and they just went in there and said the same thing to him, and it's like, but wait.
Yeah, we're not quitting, but we're not going to work for you either.
Yeah.
And they thought
yes.
that Jim Lee was, once again, he was Mick Jagger. Any analogy you want to come up with, he was the rock star. And the moment Jim Lee walks in the door, like, oh, we're going to get Jim Lee.
We're going to get Jim Lee.
Yeah.
And then Larson's behind him, and there's Silvestri, there's all these guys.
All the L-boys.
The L-boys.
Yeah.
Got to see all the L-boys. And that's amazing is that it was like, okay, we're leaving Marvel. They go to DC just to say with a fucking pie, fuck
Right.
you.
We're coming for you. We're going to eat your lunch as well.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's like, what a shot across the bow.
And
you
it's
know?
incredible seeing how DC's comic book culture overnight changes trying to keep up with Image, because for a brief shining moment, Image does so well that they replace DC as the #2 publisher in comics. And suddenly, they're killing and rebirthing Superman. They're making Green Lantern go crazy and taking on the whole universe. They're breaking Batman's back. Like, what can we do to be more like Bloodstrike? What can we do to be more like Brigade? Like all these horrible, shitty, interchangeable, nonsensical comics that are being put up by Image that we're selling in hand over fist. Because there was this weird idea at the time with both the speculators and the readers that every single comic that Image was putting out was a must-have collector's item that was going to be worth vast sums of money down the road. Little did we know, if everybody's buying something, guess what? It's going to be worth less than the paper it's printed
This,
on.
by the way, was our 16-year-old, 17-year-old's version of first lesson in supply and demand, market cap. Like, I didn't know these concepts before Image.
We learned the hard way.
We learned the hard way,
Absolutely.
exactly.
But I was on board. I was buying all of it. But suddenly I just realized eye-popping in art does not a story make. And I guess that was another brutal lesson early on. You can't just have good fights and poses. You need an Alan Moore, you need a Grant Morrison, you need a Garth Ennis. So Image kind of like reinvented and destroyed comics all at once, because when you see Marvel in the mid-90s trying to respond to Image, they're doing like Onslaught and then the Heroes Reborn. With Heroes Reborn, they're bringing Jim Lee and Rob Liefeld back, and it's just like, it was awful. Like, I've been reading comics since before I could read. I would read comics where I couldn't read. It was hieroglyphics. And then words slowly started to make sense. And to give up comics in college, it was like giving up like your teddy bear. I couldn't believe I wasn't reading comics anymore. But eventually it was, ironically, the writers who lured me back in and made me a diehard reader again for like 15, 16 years.
I think these guys are rock stars. These guys are striking out in ways.
Spike Lee was making Rob Liefeld commercials.
Yeah,
Like, that's how big of a
Levi's
rock stars
501.
they were.
Yeah, and the thing is, it's like these guys were striking out for Siegel and Schuster. Hell, I mean, they were stabbing up for guys who were still working in the business who had no voice. There was just a lot of yeomans who were working in comics for years. Guys like Tom Palmer, Paul Ryan, Richie Buckler, Butch Geis, I don't know, Mark Bright. I mean, there are so many guys who were making comics who could not do this. They just had to take the shit that they were offered. I really like the theory of what they did, the balls. They're funny guys. They're entertaining. A lot of moxie, if we can use that word. When they started making their comics, I was like, oh, none of these guys have any taste. They make terrible comics when they're left their own devices.
And they're young and disorganized, and so they don't get published on time. So suddenly you're waiting 4 or 5 months between issues. Like, wait a second, when Todd McFarlane's at Marvel, every month, like clockwork, the issue came out. Now I might wait half a year.
Once these guys were untethered, they became bosses of their own companies, especially Liefeld jumped up to a studio of like 50 guys. He had a sweatshop.
And he went from Youngblood to like 4 books very quickly.
Very quickly. The thing is, it's like, oh, what they left out and what comic book fans maybe didn't give enough credit is that some of these old, stodgy, hidebound creators, the DeFalcos of the world, the Fabian Nicietas of the world, the Chris Claremonts of the world, the Roy Thomases of the world, they gave these guys a structure. They restrained and asked them to do something, not, you know, like it's not just about blasting the panel, it's understanding why you're going to blast the panel, when, and what's the overall storytelling arc. If removed from some of these sources of restraint, these guys did not do their best work. What Carl Potts did with Jim Lee on Punisher War Journal was got Jim Lee to do his best work of his career.
Or Peter David working with Todd McFarlane.
Peter
and
David
Hulk.
working with
When you
Todd
have
McFarlane and Hulk.
Wolverine
Arguably
fighting Hulk.
the
It's-
best work of his
Nobody
career.
rereads Spawn, but people will reread that issue of Hulk until the end of time.
But even the work Michelini and McFarlane, you know, McFarlane overwhelmed Michelini at that point. You know, like he was the boss of the book.
Like Amazing Spider-Man 300 and things like that.
Exactly. But it's like Peter David was still the guy, and Todd McFarlane, he did a year. He did a year on the book as a journeyman, and he was still working out his craft. But he did the best storytelling, and those were the best Todd McFarlane. And still to this day, it's not the flashy art. It doesn't look like Spawn 100. It is much better.
It's gorgeous, but just a hint of taste and restraint.
We're all talking about this, like, you know, hey, what could go wrong with Image? It's like you have this great creation myth, and of course, just a few years later, anything that looks that good is going to start tumbling on its own weight.
And there
I
were
guess.
rifts between the creators. And the moment you have Liefeld doing Captain America for Heroes Reborn, basically going back to Marvel for work for hire, and you got Jim Lee going back and doing Fantastic Four, it fueled resentment between the creators. And then when you have Jim Lee selling off his Wildstorm imprint to
98,
DC,
99, yeah.
basically it was, I guess, too good to last. And a lot of the comics aren't worth rereading. And it looked like everything was going to fall to pieces, but then somehow Image manages to pick up the pieces and reinvent itself where it becomes better than ever.
They start making different series in different genres, and I mean, it's like, oh, there's detective work, there's noir fiction.
Yeah,
there's
Powers.
some
Powers
horror.
was, on the surface, a superhero comic, but it really was a cop show.
Now, if you go back and read Torso and Jinx, for Christ's sake, like those, that stuff was like such heavy collage. You actually drew those.
It
People
was
forget
like
that.
being like a Pacific Northwest like grunge band or being an indie filmmaker. Comics had that flavor and
zine,
swagger
had
for
a
a while.
zine look to it, the way
Yeah.
like Riot Girl would make zines or punk bands would
But I
make
think
zines.
the real turning point is when Robert Kirkman becomes as big and influential. But once again, Robert Kirkman is a writer, not an artist. When they bring him into the fold and he comes up with Invincible and Walking Dead,
Yeah.
and Walking Dead's just
Yeah,
one of those
Battle
comics.
Pope.
Yeah, but Walking Dead was one of those comics where it started out weird little black and white comic about zombies. Every month, pretty much sales continued going up. Now it's become a worldwide sensation. But it's funny how Image, which started out, it's all about the dynamic art, being a rebel rock star. Eventually, it was a writer who would kind of reinvent and save the company in a lot of ways, which paved the way for it becoming, as you describe it, HBO of comics.
They have incredible art, still to this day. The difference is that the art doesn't adhere to one style. They're all over the grid. But that's the beauty of comic books now, too, where you have there's a plurality of art styles. And especially, it's loaded with Italians, right? There was a scouting effort in the boot to bring over guys like Carmine Di Domenico, Salvador LaRocca, a Spaniard.
I love him.
He's great. He's fucking great. Suzuka, a bunch of guys from Croatia and the former Yugoslavia.
Todd McFarlane sold a lot of toys, made a couple $100 million, had a movie made, et cetera, and so forth. He's got his own empire. But the big success story is coming into Image, because the Image does not own your characters. It does not own your work. They take a little piece of the action to keep the lights on. They've got, all they own is the logo, designed by Rob Liefeld.
Yeah.
They don't own anything else. So if you are a writer and you don't mind being paid nothing, if your book's selling 5,000 copies a month,
Can publish.
you will then own your character, you will own your creation, so that if and when Amazon comes knocking and says, hey, that comic Invincible you did 15 years ago, we would like to make an animated show, boom, you reap the benefits. And that's what's the seismic shift in the model, because at Marvel, when you see someone like Thanos popping up on the screen in Endgame, and you know that Jim Starlin, who created him, isn't really getting any piece of the action except for as like an apology check because of the bad headlines. It's like, well, wait a second, he came up with that character, but it was work for hire. So Marvel owns Thanos. At Image, if you invent The Walking Dead, it's yours. And that's the seismic change, and that's why Image stays good, because someone like Grant Morrison he's happy to give you a great idea or a great character or a great story because he knows you're not going to steal it from me. You're not going to screw him like Superman or Batman or whatever.
Is it worth mentioning, my old friend, that Image became Image around the same time that Vertigo stopped being Vertigo? Because that's kind of the missing link in all this. Vertigo was that kind of brand in the 90s.
Absolutely.
R.I.P. Vertigo, and Image takes up the slack for them,
Yeah. Image in the 90s was all about the artist, whereas Vertigo in the 90s was all about the writer. And they had the best writing in comics was to be found over at Vertigo.
All right, so who's the bigger success story? You talk about this. Is it Kirkman because of The Walking Dead, or is it Miller selling his entire line over to Netflix? A deal that no one talks about, but was for beaucoup bucks.
I would regard Miller as the better success in terms of legacy, because he's created his own fictional setting, his own line. It's a variety of titles. But Mark Miller, at a certain point, looked at Stan Lee and said, everybody loves Stan Lee. Because in the early 60s, he came up with the Fantastic Four. He helped co-write Spider-Man and co-created with what the hell's the co-creator of Spider-Man, the artist? I'm blanking.
Ditko.
Yeah, Steve Ditko. And obviously co-creating the Avengers. Like, people remember him because of this library of characters he gave birth to alongside Kirby, et cetera, in the early 60s. Miller was giving Marvel their best stuff in the early 2000s, but he jumped ship. And he has given stuff to Image as well, but eventually he created Miller World, which is ideally what you want to be as a creator. Create your own fictional setting, your own new franchises, your own new characters, and that's why we get Kick-Ass, which leads to a movie like Kick-Ass, which is one of the best R-rated superhero movies ever made, directed by Matthew Vaughn, which then opens the door to the Secret Service franchise, or Kingsman. It's Kingsman: The Secret Service, which was drawn by Dave Gibbons, which becomes the movie, which then becomes Golden Circle, which then becomes The Kingsman, and there's a show on the way. There's so few examples of new franchises coming into being over the last 10 years. Mark Miller is one of the only guys who has given birth to new concepts, new stories, new franchises.
Netflix bought all his ideas and all his comics, made him exclusive. The thing is that 6 seconds later, they completely changed their they own the comics.
Did you watch Super Crooks?
No.
Dude.
I know, there's something there, but it's like...
Mark Miller's comic, coupled with Japanese animation, It was so goddamn good, it'll make your head spin.
Sure.
Nobody watched it, but Mark Miller went back to his original 6-issue limited series, wrote additional material, and it was like the best comic book adaptation I've ever seen. And for whatever reason, the really good comic book adaptations get ignored so often.
Netflix it's a needle in a stack of needles. That's one of the worst things you can do is make something incredibly interesting for Netflix, because that's one way to make sure no one ever sees it.
So I guess I'm contradicting myself when I say I no longer want to see anybody adapt anything that I like. But every once in a while, something like Super Crooks does get made. If they could get the same Japanese animation team to adapt Nemesis as a show, go hard R, go X, whatever, I will watch.
Let me just close this segment out by saying, you know what? I don't ever want to see pencils by Rob Liefeld again. I don't want to see anything by Todd McFarlane again. However, I love these guys as raconteurs. All I want to do is see them talk. As personalities now, they're elder statesmen. I want them on like the fucking Hollywood squares in the Match Game. That's where they belong at home in comic
Give me your
bullshitting
best,
about everything.
Give me your best Todd McFarlane impersonation, but as if you're Rob Liefeld impersonating Todd McFarlane.
So you're working on the hands and the fingers. It's like I'm drawing all the bricks and all the details and all the walls. I'm drawing the windows and the cross hatching while you're just sitting there working on fingers and hands and elbows.
The thumbs.
The thumbs. That's what he said.
Well, Todd McFarlane is like a guy who, in another life, probably would have been a great hot dog salesman at a baseball diamond, and just talking because he loves baseball. He's obsessed with baseball. He loves collectibles. But he would have been the most charismatic person in the baseball diamond, and he would have been an institution for decades. People would remember for the rest of their lives. But by some magical accident, he walks into a comic shop at 15, comes back again the next day, comes back again the next day, and by his 20s. He is a rock star of comics.
He's not even, he's like John Henry Irons. He's like a folk man. He's not even a real human.
He took the page from George Lucas's book and realized, oh, the money's not in these stupid comics. It's the toys.
I gotta own the toys for these things.
Or Mel Brooks would say, merchandising, where the real money's made, etc. He got into the merchandising, and now he has enough money to basically create his own island empire. There are certain topics which are regarded as the one true opinion, and increasingly as I get older, I feel like there should be no one true opinion on any topic, even if they're expressing an opinion I agree with. And the big one in college was everybody was basically had to beaten into them. Citizen Kane is the greatest movie ever made, and I was like, yes, like I got a raging boner with a capital O for Citizen Kane. All my heroes, from William Friedkin to Martin Scorsese to whomever, they all look up to this movie, they all revere it. So it was very easy for me to start drinking the Kool-Aid. But what I noticed was that rather than beating people over the head with my opinion, if I wanted to bring people into the conversation, the best way to do so was I would host these Citizen Kane screenings because everybody was studying it for class. And I would serve scotch, people would rip bong hits. We would have like a little party and we would watch Citizen Kane. It was more like a show. We weren't watching a piece of art that was not allowed to be criticized. We were just having a great time with a great piece of entertainment. And I feel like that's far more persuasive and far more inviting than just saying either you like it or shut up about it. Embrace the one true opinion or you're cast out of like the inner circle. So when it comes to one true opinions that you might push back on, do you have any, are there any kind of sacred cows out there that you're ready to slaughter?
The musical is trash. The movie musical is utter garbage. Everyone who enjoys movie musicals is wrong with a capital R. They're terrible, they're doing it incorrect, they don't understand what they're looking at, and they're lying about everything they've ever believed in their entire life. And I'll explain in this 10,000 part answer to you. There is this orthodoxy in movies where, say what you will about the 70s generation, say what you talk about Bogdanovich, lionizing the guy from the 20s and 30s. Everyone's got these great periods of time where they think, oh, maybe this is the best part of it. That doesn't mean something new that doesn't come out afterwards. However, I think something that overarches all of this is people's love of the movie musical. Now, granted, that's a broad term. The movie musical could mean anything from the Gold Diggers.
10 years ago, Hugh Jackman, the musical is back, which he declared at the Oscars.
Yeah.
No, it isn't.
But I mean, the Gold Diggers of 1937, you know what I'm saying?
33 is a really good one.
33, okay, well, I did. But it's like you can
you can put a flagus everywhere along the line.
Yeah, that's got Remember My Forgotten Man, and I will die on the hill defending number 30,
you're going to die on that hill.
33.
But I mean, there's so many other musicals, and again, they have existed. They've gone up and down. There's been a sine curve of whether they've been good or not, but they've been consistent. It has never gone away as a piece of art.
I am 99% with you in the total rejection, but every once in a while I will see one like Bob Fosse's All That Jazz, which knocks me down, and I'm just in awe of the experience.
Yeah, I stick a splinter in my brain, and I tell myself that's not a movie musical. I tell myself that's Bob Fosse's fever dream, an ode to his penis, and I say that somehow gets that down, and I love that movie. That movie's great. I've seen it a bunch of times. The fact that we are stuck with this paradoxical culture where what is old is instantly jettisoned, which I'm not hanging on that shit. You don't need to keep liking the same garbage that I like. I made a whole waste of life out of Cobra Commander. I don't expect anybody else to like it. That's strictly for me. That's my corner of nothing. That's nonsense I want to live inside of. That's perfect. However, it seems like musicals get a pass to behave the exact same way they did in like 1931. And that orthodoxy, that hidebound orthodoxy, has barely changed. And you know what, man? Fuck Lin-Manuel Miranda, because his stuff is exactly, I think it's the form of it. It's rap the musical. Hey, I'm going to sit here and tell you what it's like to come from St. Kitts. And it's like his rap is so slowed down and anodyne for audiences to come out of fucking Ohio.
What are the most atrocious musicals that have invited this venom, this bile, this hate? Because I've got plenty. I mean, just to get into some childhood trauma, kindergarten, I was in The Sound of Music. I went to an all-boys school, and they were putting on The Sound of Music, so it meant a lot of boys were going to play girls, and I had to be a little girl in it, and I had to have, like, red dots on my cheeks and wear a dress and the whole deal.
You were 37 when this happened?
But when you're at an all-guy school and you're wearing a dress and all the girls are saying, "Oh, but you look so pretty," it can be ruinous to your confidence. And consequently, I did not see The Sound of Music, the film, until Nick Nadell invited me on his podcast to talk about, I can't remember the title, maybe it's just the movies that we've never seen, but I'd never seen The Sound of Music, which is one of my mom's all-time favorite musicals. So I've got some deep-rooted hate and disdain, but what are the musicals that just have traumatized
You broke the seal on that. Yeah, Sound of Music. Mary Poppins, all these things that are part of the canon,
Is it the cheerfulness of Julie Andrews? Because even I'm blanking on the co-star in Sound of Music. He said working with Julie Andrews, Christopher Plummer, was like every day waking up when you're hungover to like the world's most like animated greeting card getting right in your face, and he was like he couldn't take the positivity. It was just too much.
Yeah, I mean, I'll go back. Victor Fleming. I can't even. I like The Wizard of Oz. I just don't want them to sing the fucking songs in it.
Fair enough.
Here and I could tell you. You bring up the movie musical, I'll shit on it from a great height. I'll tell you exactly why I think it needs to be defenestrated and never talked about again. And it's like, and I mean, I'll hedge my bet by saying maybe there's one movie musical that I actually legit enjoy, and that's Phantom of the Paradise. And that's just because that movie is so fucking weird. But all these other, hoary, long-of-tooth things like West Side Story, I never need to see that again. I don't need Jerome Robbins. I don't need Sondheim. I don't need any of that horse shit.
I played
Get it out of here.
saxophone, alto sax in the pit band for West Side Story back in high school. That was the most fun I ever had interacting with West Side Story. I don't really like the Robert Wise movie. A lot of people regard it as the best ever
Bob
made.
Wise, I love Bob Wise, incredible director.
But being a part of it reminds me of another one true opinion. When I was in high school, one of my English teachers, when we were reading The Tragedy of Julius Caesar, he said, "If you don't like Shakespeare, you're wrong." And he said it half kidding. But there are a lot of people who teach Shakespeare in a way which sends people running screaming for the hills, whereas what you really need to do is get the kids on a stage with the text, reading and interacting and performing, and they'll have a blast with it. Same thing with like Orson Welles. Don't beat people over the head in class saying, like them or you're out. You gotta invite people in, but with the musical, the way I would invite people in is with the stuff that's more dance-driven as opposed to song-driven, because usually the big breaking point is when somebody walks into a room and breaks into song, but if you show them like the Nicholas Brothers in Stormy Weather, doing stunts that are superior to anything Jet Li or Jackie Chan ever did. I mean, Fred Astaire said the Nicholas Brothers, greatest dancers that he ever saw.
That's true, yeah.
The splits and the cartwheels and the athletics. It's some of the most jaw-dropping stuff ever captured on film. So even if you loathe the movie musical, watch the Nicholas Brothers. Watch Gene Kelly doing what he did.
This pedantry inside of a movie musical is that when the music starts, the story grinds to a halt. And the sound of like the Dear Evan Hansen type songs, which sound so parenthetical, where the movie stops, this guy says something inside of a void, it's a vacuum, and it doesn't carry. No one hears your thing. There's no dialogue going on, unless it's fucking Aida, where the whole thing is sung. You know, the movie musical just freezes like you have 15 minutes of story amongst 90 minutes of music.
Is Milos Forman's adaptation of Amadeus a musical?
No, not at all. No, not even for a single second. It's a movie that uses music.
But it has a lot of opera.
It's got a lot of opera, but those are performances. And that's Tom Hulse is going like this. Yeah, that movie is beautiful. I would definitely not consider it the performances are part of the story. Much like I could even get away with saying half of All That Jazz is the performance inside the thing, but the storytelling isn't done through music until there's like 2 or 3 pieces that actually are, like the last Roy Scheider piece where he's goodbye, all that stuff.
So if we could zero in on the 3 movie musicals that just cause you angst and hate and just get you going.
West Side Story, West Side Story, West Side Story. I'm heaping bullshit on it. It maybe doesn't deserve it, but in my head, that's that concentric ring of hell with both, what is it, Judas?
If there is a hell, it's Bill Scurry locked in a chair watching Rodgers and Hammerstein musicals. Yeah, watching Seven Brides, Seven Brothers on a loop.
Yeah, people, 7 Brides for 7 Brothers, some garbage bullshit like that. Yeah, and having a little, what is it, a scoop of sugar helps the medicine go down. Whatever the Julie Andrews song is.
No, that's
Mary Poppins.
Mary Poppins, yeah,
That's what
which
I'm
I
saying.
still have not yet seen because of my trauma from Sound of Music. I'm going to catch you in a trap of your own making.
There you go.
One of your first pitches to Wrong Reel was to come and tackle Mel Brooks. Is the original from 1968 producers a musical?
No, because the performance, the
It's
story,
got
it's not
Springtime
storytelling.
for Hitler. It's got
does.
songs.
No,
It's got Dick Shawn doing the
LSD flower.
Yeah.
I love that song.
Yeah, it's got songs.
The songs are performance. They're not storytelling. And I think when you try to tell me that songs are going to act as text, fuck you and fuck all that. The only thing more scabrous is when people try to convince me that modern dance, where the dance acts as text, fuck that shit as well. I can't parse dance as text. I'm sure there's something there. I went to a friend was trying to set this thing up in Brooklyn. It's like, come see my modern dance thing. It's like, great, I sat down. Within 6 seconds, it's like, I hate you. I want to stab your eyes out.
Flamenco ballet. Some Spaniards might resist and push back because they have done flamenco dance interpretations of plays where the dance is part of the storytelling. So I've seen you going to war with a few of our friends and collaborators on the great David Lynch, where the one movie by him that you love is usually the one that a lot of other people have kind of casually disregarded. So what are the one true opinions on Mr. Lynch, where you might say the emperor has no clothes?
Talk about someone who's a pure visual stylist. He makes cinema the way cinema was probably meant to be made. He is influenced by painting and visual arts. I think the problem is when I watch his movies, I have a very low bar to get me, Bill Scurry, the founder of Daily Cobra Commander, to get me on board, which is this. In any scene, do I generally know where the characters are psychologically? Do I understand what they want from one moment to the next? And no matter how surreal some filmmakers can get, no matter how abstract some filmmakers can get, people do a better job with personality, direction, and character about trying to say, this is what the character wants from moment to moment. If you watch Wild at Heart, if you watch Lost Highway or Mulholland, there are many moments where the weeds are high. You can't see out of the cornfield. You have no idea what the characters want. So I'm watching a burlesque of strange performances. I'm watching Robert Blake show up on the phone, and as he's talking, you hear the
call me.
Yeah, the voice comes through, and he's in front of you, so it's both these things at the same time. And the thing is, I was a lot more militant about this, I would say, about 15 years ago. So after I came out of Mulholland Drive, right, my friend Rich got me a seat in the theaters, and as we're walking out, I said, oh, this is great. We just saw Mulholland Drive. I have no idea what the fuck it was. I hope you're happy. They just befuddled me for the last 2 hours. But he spent the next 40 minutes annotating it for me. Like, he got it. He was saying that, the back half of the movie was in conversation with the front half, and it's all this shit that flew right over my head. And I'm like, you know what? That makes so much more sense than what I just saw. And if I'm sitting inside without any breadcrumbs, I'm inside the Cretan maze. Is that what it was? Where the Minotaur was from Theseus. If I'm sitting, I can't. He strung himself through to get out of the Cretan maze again. It's like, if I don't know where I am, then it's like, how am I supposed to get through this movie if I don't know what the characters want? And it's so abstruse.
But it's why people are still talking about it 21 years later.
Yeah, and that's the thing.
David Lynch refuses to interpret his films, and when asked what Wild at Heart was about, he said, well, it's about 2 hours and 15 minutes, which is the best response ever given by a director.
Yeah.
Like, your job is to analyze the film, break it down, discuss it. I mean, yeah, like with the Coen brothers when they were interviewed, they were joking about how critics so often ask them to do the critic's job for them by essentially articulating what they're going to write about. It's like, no, like that's your job to wrestle with it, tear it down, build it up, whatever you're going to do. We've said all we're going to say with the film, for better or for worse. And Lynch just refuses to spoon feed us. I guess you could say Elephant Man is more accessible than others, which is probably why it did so well. Blue Velvet, less accessible, but I can still vividly recall being in college, and we took a bunch of mini-thins, and we were like just doing all these horrible things to our brains prior to watching it. We put it in on Laserdisc, and I was so excited. And we paused it at one point so I could go to the bathroom, and I came back, and they turned on the lights, and they'd taken it out. Like, man, this is really like bumming us out. We want to watch something else. Like, can we watch like Kingpin? And I was like, fuck all of you. We're putting it back on and we're finishing. This is going to be amazing. And we power through, and some of them became David Lynch fans. So yeah, we were, flash forward a few years later, we're in the theater watching Mulholland Drive, and a particular scene that came along that appealed to red-blooded males, and we were high fives all around.
Yeah.
And
That's a good scene.
that's a good scene. And
buy
so
in.
yeah, I'm on team David Lynch, but where I part ways with perhaps Marcus Penn is with Inland Empire, where I think the feelings you experienced during Mulholland Drive, that's how I feel with Inland Empire, which I just vomited right back out. Like, this is total bullshit. I guess we can toast to both propping up and destroying
Yes.
the one true opinion.
Let's establish an orthodoxy and rip it down at the same time. Also, let's toast to David Lynch's Dune, which ironically is the most accessible of all his movies, even ahead of The Elephant Man.
I fucking love Dune. And might be heresy, I prefer it to the Denis Villeneuve.
I do too, but that has nothing to do with the Denis Villeneuve movie. It's just because Dune occupies a place in my heart. I will hold on to it forever.
As old man fans always talk about how much movies suck these days, et cetera, and so forth, it's easy to say the cinema's dead, fuck the whole thing, moving on. I like the movies that I like, but I'm just, it's like it's too painful to hang on to it too tightly when you're constantly being disappointed. But I have to push back on that impulse or that emotion, because there have been so many times throughout history where people have declared the death of cinema, and they've always proven to be wrong. Obviously, the cinema's been around since roughly 1895. I mean, you can also point to that original like Muybridge short with like the jockey on the horse, etc.
Fred Something Sneeze is one of those first.
Yeah,
ones, too.
but even as far back as 1895, people were declaring the death of cinema when one of the Lumiere brothers said the cinema's an invention without a future. And a lot of silent directors in the 20s thought it was dead with the arrival of sound. A lot of actors thought it was dead with the arrival of sound. A lot of people thought it was dead with the arrival of TV in the late 40s, early 50s. And a lot of people thought it was dead with the arrival of cable TV and VHS, which leads into streaming, et cetera, and so forth. Even Peter Greenaway said there's evidence already that cinema's dying on its feet as far back as 1995. So we are not the first to bring up this topic. Long live the cinema, or cinema is dead? What do you think?
No, I'm going to answer the paradox, because as somebody who participated in the democratization of filmmaking, the idea that in the late 90s and early 2000s, two things jumped into fans' hands, right? You had the ability of DV video became affordable, consumer electronics, made the ability for people to not just record anything, but actually record decent images. You can actually exercise cinematography.
Yeah, you could shoot like Wong Kar-wai for very little money.
Then something people don't talk enough about is the invention of non-linear editing, non-destructive, non-linear editing, NLEs, which is Premiere Pro, Final Cut. The software changes the game. You're not working on Steambecs anymore. Steambeck, I forget what the hell the machine's called.
Out of my lane.
Moviola, yeah. The idea that you're not cutting film, it's not destructive, it is all aliasing media inside.
The democratization of the technology.
Yeah, but you need both of those things together. You need the ability to catch, you need the ability to cut. And all of a sudden, you've opened the world of making film beyond lab costs, stamping film, splicing pieces of celluloid together.
I call it the era of no excuses, because in the 90s, people said, oh, you got to get your foot in the door. You got to pay your dues. You got to climb the ranks. 21st century, that's eradicated.
It is. So what you have is the ability, the tools of making film has been placed in everybody's hands if you want it. All you need to do is familiarize yourself and begin to learn how to use a camera, to begin to learn how to use software. Now, what that means is that is the absolute flattening, the steamrollering of all gatekeeper
jobs that were left over. At that point, it doesn't matter anymore who is in charge of giving you. No one can tell you, no. I know you made a short film, but no. And it's like, no, fuck that. My short film's going to go up on Vimeo. My short film's going to go up in a film festival. I'm going to put it on YouTube. You know, after 2007, you say YouTube comes into the mix. But
yeah, I mean, Josh Trank, that's how he got discovered before Chronicle. And obviously, I do not like Josh Trank's movies. However, he made a stupid short about kids at a high school brawl that whip out lightsabers. And Fox called him like, who are you? Like, where's this coming from? Let's do Chronicle. Let's do Fantastifour, whatever you want to call it for that abomination that he created out of Marvel's First Family. He got discovered through making a short, which just shows there, once again, no more gatekeepers.
I mean, there are gatekeepers, but they're irrelevant. I mean, I think one of the reasons why print in all its forms is kind of like dying in front of us too is because they still believe in gatekeepers. The idea that there's still editors and there's still publishers like Graydon Carter. I mean, he's not there anymore, but the idea that these guys, this is my magazine, I have this ridiculous hair, and so I'm going to say what happens in New York because I'm the doyen of society. That's bullshit. We're not going to play that game anymore. The thing is, though, as you destroy gatekeepers, as you proliferate exhibition, as you proliferate the idea of anyone can get their hands on a lens, learn how to use a prime lens, learn how to use editing software, what it means is that there is a 35,000-mile-long blast crater that you're inside of, like in Mexico when the frickin' comet hit the Earth, and that everything is stuck in this huge caldera, right? Now, you can't get seen from the guy next to you and the 2,000 people ahead of you. It is a gigantic, writhing pit of noise.
Oh, yeah, white noise, yeah.
It's white noise. And so that, ironically...
Which we're contributing to with this video.
Right. No one asked for this. No one wants it. We're giving it to them anyway. This is precisely the last thing the landscape needs. People now are fighting against the drumbeat, the din of white noise.
The attention economy.
Well, it is in some ways. And so the problem is that, I mean, this goes back to the idea, is cinema dead? No, not at all. There are more people practicing cinema in fucking strange places that you would have never thought. Do you think that we could have gotten kick-ass martial arts movie from, was it Jakarta? Was it Malaysia? Kuala Lumpur? Where did the raids come from?
Oh, were they? I thought they were Indonesia.
Indonesia, yeah. I'm saying it's like, not all just martial arts just because it's Asia, but I'm saying.
But you don't get The Night Comes For Us and all these, the best action movies in the world, Southeast Asia, by far.
Joe Weirsethical, who makes all those movies that I can't stand, you know, Uncle Boo and Me, Marcus Pin favorite, you know?
Yeah.
But it's like, again, that's the plurality of voices where if movies didn't do what they did, if cinema hadn't been democratized, cameras wouldn't have spilled all over Bangkok and Thailand, and he wouldn't have come to the United States. I think he went to the University of Chicago to study film. He's a little older than we are. But I mean, the idea that all these non-traditional venues, people are making movies with all these different cultural backgrounds, all these influences that, you know, cinema is healthy as ever. There's an amazing amount of stuff.
Some kids, I believe in Ghana, did a recreation of the trailer for Extraction that went viral. It was the exact same trailer, shot for shot, but just done by kids in Ghana. And Chris Hemsworth retweeted it, and people lost their minds. But it was absolutely fabulous. But if you look at the early days of movies in like late 1800s, early 1900s, a lot of them were like how to take a bath, how to kiss, like pretty rudimentary, basic things that were played
I
arcade.
should have watched those.
But they're exactly, but they're very similar to a lot of like babies kissing cat videos on YouTube and that sort of thing. But I was listening to a podcast last night with Bret Easton Ellis, and he was talking about the second season of Euphoria, where Sam Levinson wrote and directed every single episode. They shot it on film, and it feels dangerous, and it feels electric, and it feels alive. You're talking about auteur-driven storytelling on HBO, which is just a gorgeous, immersive, exciting, provocative experience no matter where you're coming from. Clearly, cinema's not dead. If the season finale of season 2 had 18 million views on HBO, which is like a Game of Thrones level success.
So this is a red herring. You asked me this question because you already had an answer to it the whole time.
Never ask a question if you don't already have an answer prepared. I just ask people questions about topics that I want to talk about. So
eventually it went back to
But as I was listening to that last night, I was like, yeah, of course cinema's not dead. If you have an auteur director, son of Barry Levinson, but if you look at his early stuff, Assassination Nation, or even the first season of Euphoria, where he wrote every episode but he only directed a handful, he's learning from his errors as he goes, and he was ready for season 2. I think as long as there are auteurs on a grand platform making lush, sumptuous storytelling, cinema, alive and well.
I agree, Roger. You're absolutely correct. I think cinema exists in all sorts of strange places, or people don't give it credit. We can sit here and rail on YouTube for destroying attention spans. This is a separate topic, but I think that the amount of filmmaking, the amount of skill that is chipped away at, compartmentalized, bundled and boxed into these small little packages, or even something as simple as ASMR videos, which I love. That is cinema.
Are we going to finish the shoot creating some ASMR?
I'm going to
here?
whisper into these microphones over time.
Start caressing the microphone.
I got to put a peppermint in my mouth later.
Whispering.